Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, 𝖎𝖌𝖍𝙝𝙗, back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku met a Quirk copying Reincarnate? Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Loud sniffles echoed throughout your bedroom as you tried to keep your endless, salty tears from staining the fragile pages of the final volume of My Hero Academia. A mountain of tissues sat on your nightstand, your arm wrapped around your favorite 𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖡 plush, and as you reached the volume's last line you let out a choked sob. The volume's final line declared that this was the story of how all of them would keep reaching out their hands forever. The Class 1A skip designs looked incredible, if one ignored Mineta. Your lips twisted into a sincere smile. You closed the manga and placed it on the shelf with the rest of the MHA volumes you had collected, little reminders of how much that childhood series had meant to you. It felt like yesterday when the My Hero Academia anime premiered and you were still a preteen. That show alone introduced you to the wider world of animation, games, and comics. You acknowledged that there were many kinds of media, but you did not really engage with them until after watching the first season. Everything afterward was a pleasant blur. One day you were a beginner, and the next you were the definition of a shut-in nerd who knew more about obscure fandom theories than algebra. My Hero Academia had been the catalyst that shaped who you became. You read, watched, and played whatever you could find. Posters covered every inch of your bedroom walls. Funko Pops, action figures, video games, manga, and plushes of favorite characters crowded your shelves and bed. If your wallet were sentient, it would cry from the amount of merchandise you bought. You'll clean up in the morning. It wasn't your fault that you hyper-focused on things that interested you. More than spending money on collectibles, you loved ranting about your current obsession to anyone who would listen. Unfortunately, no one at school shared that enthusiasm. Many of your peers avoided you, and it did not help your self-esteem. Mutuals on social sites were kind, but they did not feel like people you could truly connect with. You had one different companion you talked to a few times each school year, but that was about it for human interaction. It would be a lie to say you enjoyed the reputation of the nerd. The idea of having friends interested you, but no matter how hard you tried, you did not know how to build bonds. People who shared your interests often kept them hidden to avoid ridicule, and you learned that lesson the hard way. You winced remembering 3 classmates who had mocked your drawing of Levi Ackerman in middle school. They gathered around your desk and offered rude, unnecessary criticisms before turning their attention to your appearance. You had worn jeans and a hoodie with a skeleton logo, poor fashion choices you now cringed at but accepted as part of being an inexperienced teenager. The final straw came when one of them stole your Shadow the Hedgehog keychain and tossed it around like it was a joke while you desperately tried to retrieve it. When a teacher finally arrived, the leader threw the keychain into the trash, and the teacher told you to stop being such a freak. Afterward, you switched classes and avoided the 3 students at all costs. You made 2 rules for yourself from then on. The first was to keep your interests to yourself. They always wore a mask. At least with the mask, they were treated indifferently. They kept their exasperation hidden when they saw the leader of their high school bullies ranting about how much a masterpiece Attack on Titan was. Not once did those bullies ever apologize. Their parents were not as present as they wanted. They gave just enough money for necessities and a few treats, then left them with a nanny to fend for themselves. Because their parents were mostly absent, they explored the internet on their own from a young age. Their nanny had been a kind, gentle woman who supported their love for all kinds of media. She listened to their rants and taught them how to take care of themselves through adolescence. They could almost call her their real mother, though they never said it out loud. They let out a contented sigh as they wiped away the evidence of a recent sob. A pleasant chill ran down their spine as the carpet brushed their socks. Without socks, the carpet felt like sandpaper. They landed on their back on the bed, blew out their favorite scented candle, wrapped themselves in a weighted blanket, and then covered that with a regular blanket. After several minutes of failing to fall asleep, they grabbed their phone and scrolled through YouTube for something to watch. They chose to rewatch the pilot of The Amazing Digital Circus for the 100th time. By the halfway mark their eyes were heavy. They turned off the phone and plugged it into charge. As consciousness slipped away, a question folded into their thoughts. They wondered what their life would have been like with better parents, if they had been more socially accepted, if there were a version of themselves who felt different. They did not want to imagine life without the masterpieces that had kept them going, but they also did not know if they were truly happy. Those stories had offered only temporary comfort from loneliness. Before the last strand of awareness snapped, they whispered that they wished they were wanted somewhere, and then they fell asleep, unknowingly sealing their fate. Sometime later, an unfamiliar voice called from another room that it was time to wake up. They yawned and stretched. When they finally opened their eyes, they gasped this was not their room. The posters and expensive merchandise were gone. The walls were painted a soft green. Where a shelf of manga had been, there was now a shelf of children's toys and hardcover picture books. The room was clean and cozy, if a little bland. They went to stand but recoiled and jumped back onto the bed because of the carpet. On the rebound they noticed with growing alarm that their hands and feet looked tiny. They muttered in disbelief that their voice even sounded different. This had to be a dream, they thought. Was it because of the wish they'd made? To test the reality of it, they slammed their forehead against the wall beside the bed. It hurt, and they bit back a cry as they rubbed the sore spot with small fingers. The situation felt unbearably strange. They could hardly believe they had been transported to another world. At least it seemed painless, they told themselves, but an even larger question pressed in. Where had they been sent? A window on the wall offered a glimpse outside. Using pillows and tiptoeing on small toes, they peered out and saw modern buildings, trees, sidewalks, and even a drone passing overhead. It was either a contemporary or near-future world, they realized, which ruled out historical settings. They imagined the worst-case scenarios of being thrown into a world of powerful monsters or supernatural threats. They pictured being overwhelmed by a monstrous attack and knew they would not last long in such danger. If they were lucky, they thought, some heroic figure might arrive and save the day, and they might even get to see 𝖎𝖌𝖏 if that world existed at all. The unfamiliar feminine voice called again, this time with impatience. They did not want to upset this new guardian, so they leapt over the carpet, pulled on their socks, and left the bedroom for the kitchen where the voice had come from. In the kitchen, the woman who had spoken reminded them of their old nanny in warmth but not in appearance. She looked to be in her late 30s with clear bronze skin. Her hair was styled in Fulani braids and colored a deep Oxford blue. Her eyes were an intense vermilion, kind but sharp, and dimples appeared when she smiled. Those features were not typical human traits. This felt unmistakably like an anime world. The woman told them that she had been getting worried and that she had made their favorite breakfast. She set the plate on the table. Their mouth watered and their stomach cried out in hunger. The protagonist sat down and began to eat eagerly. The guardian chuckled at the sight of them gobbling food and then advised that if they ate too fast they would get bloated while she began to clean the kitchen. Deciding it was best to listen, you began to take small bites. It was a bit too late though. By the time you reached the 5th bite, you were already finished. You grabbed your plate and walked toward the sink, but when your sight fell beneath the counter you were reminded that you weren't a tall 17-year-old anymore. The nanny whose name you still needed to learn noticed your struggle and took the plate from your small hands. You used to clean your own dishes to make your old nanny's life easier. That habit was gone now. The nanny thanked you and said she had it, and she told you to brush your teeth and get ready for your first day of kindergarten. You nodded, thanked her for the meal, and then asked for her name with feigned innocence, hoping she would not be suspicious. She smiled politely and said her name was Minato and that she would be your nanny while your parents were out of town. Minato, like the father from that other story, seemed familiar and that made you smile. Things were not so different from your old life so far. Your parents were still out of the picture and someone else was being paid to take care of you. You felt oddly okay about it. After brushing your teeth, you dug through your drawers for something cool but comfortable to wear. It seemed to be summer, so you reached for something loose. You reminded yourself of the basics. You had been reincarnated into an anime, the setting was modern or futuristic, you were around 3 years old, Minato was your new nanny, and you had wished to be wanted somewhere. This was that somewhere. You were not the new main character. You still looked like you, just kiddified. As long as it wasn't a scuffed universe, you would be happy. While rummaging for a shirt, something colorful caught your eye. When you pulled it out, your eyes widened. A navy blue shirt with a logo of a muscular hero flexing and the words Plus Ultra above him. You couldn't believe it. You were 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖌 to My Hero Academia. That realization sent you into a frantic search through the rest of the drawers for a neon blue kindergarten shirt with a tiny star logo at the right side. When you finally found it, you had to suppress a loud happy squeal. You had the same kindergarten shirt as Izuku and Katsuki, which meant you lived in the same neighborhood and would be able to interact with them. This felt like the best day of your life. Without wasting a second, you stripped and quickly put on the neon shirt and black pants, then bolted out of your bedroom toward the front door where your shoes were. Minato called after you to slow down and reminded you that kindergarten didn't begin for an hour, trying to figure out what had suddenly energized you. You told Minato that the early bird gets the worm and that you were simply excited to make new friends. Minato couldn't argue with that attitude, so she went to get her sandals while you pumped your fist in victory. On the quiet drive to the school, your imagination ran wild. You wondered whether you would be able to befriend Izuku, a fellow nerd who seemed as obsessed with heroes as you were with comics. You also thought about how he was treated in the future as quirkless and felt a fierce protectiveness for him. Baby Izuku did not deserve mistreatment, especially not from Katsuki, and the idea of him crying made your fists clench. You reminded yourself that Katsuki would grow and change later, but just the thought of him bullying that sweet child made you want to rush to Izuku's defense. You also worried about Shigaraki and whether you could change certain tragic events. If you could not change canon, you planned at least to make the characters' lives less terrible, starting with Izuku. You knew you had to be careful or you would seem suspicious. Minato parked in front of the school and told you she would pick you up after class, asking you to stay safe and calling you by name. You unbuckled your seatbelt, slung your backpack over one shoulder, thanked Minato, and hurried inside the building where you would soon meet two boys who would change your life for better or worse. It was not hard to spot the two soon-to-be rivals among the sea of children. They were made to be recognizable. A bush of green hair and a head of spiky blonde hair stood out. An impossibly wide grin spread across your face as you rushed toward them, weaving through the crowd. You panicked inwardly about how to greet them, not wanting to be either too friendly or too aloof. Excitement overrode logic. Before you could plan, your hand reached out and grabbed Izuku's hand. Izuku turned and greeted you with an awkward smile. You registered how adorable he was and felt your heart race at the simple friendliness of the moment. You had taken his hand out of the blue, and he responded like a normal friend. Your palms grew sweaty as you tried to force yourself to speak, feeling both thrilled and nervous at the same time. It had been a long time since 𝖭𝖆 had talked to someone who was not hiding behind a screen. They felt like a socially awkward kid who never left their room, nerves bubbling as they tried to speak. They stammered that they were nervous and searching for the right words. Katsuki interrupted with a fierce demand to know if they needed something and told them to hurry up because class was starting. Encouraged to be honest, 𝖭𝖆 took a deep breath and asked if they could be friends with Katsuki and Izuku, explaining that they were new to the neighborhood and felt like they did not know many people. They added that they thought the two of them were the coolest kids there and would be honored to be their friend. Both Katsuki and Izuku looked surprised and the three of them fell awkwardly silent while other children and teachers continued their conversations. Just as 𝖭𝖆 almost decided to apologize and back away, Katsuki laughed a real, genuine laugh and then smiled. He said that 𝖭𝖆 had guts and asked for their name. 𝖭𝖆 replied with a grin that their name was 𝖭𝖆, last name. Katsuki declared that 𝖭𝖆 was in his group from now on, accepting them with a boastful air. 𝖭𝖆 beamed and thanked him profusely, overwhelmed with joy at being acquainted with two of the main characters from their favorite manga. It turned out they were in the same class as Katsuki and Izuku. Katsuki and Izuku introduced 𝖭𝖆 to their other friends, who were initially skeptical about a newcomer joining, but Katsuki convinced them and 𝖭𝖆 was easily accepted. Pre-Quirk Katsuki was noticeably more open to new friends than his future self. The hours passed quickly as the group completed simple classroom activities and had fun. Katsuki expected 𝖭𝖆 to gravitate toward him as others did, but to his surprise, their attention was focused on Izuku. Katsuki watched as 𝖭𝖆 and Izuku started a friendly competition to see who could draw 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖏 better. They fawned over how amazing All Might was and listened to Izuku's enthusiastic ramblings. Izuku was timid and sensitive, the polar opposite of Katsuki's confident and brash personality. Katsuki had always been used to praise and attention, so it stung a little to see, preferring Izuku's company. He felt a flash of hurt but returned to his own work and tried to ignore the resentment. Unaware that their presence beside Izuku was irritating Katsuki, simply thought Izuku already had his group of friends and had not meant to exclude anyone. Izuku praised 𝖭𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖓𝖡 drawing and encouraged them warmly. Had drawn fan art back in their old life and had a modest following, so Izuku's praise attracted the attention of other kids and even the two teachers. A small crowd gathered to compliment the drawing and began to feel overwhelmed. Their legs shook and their fingers fidgeted with the pencil under the pressure of too many eyes and too much attention. They were grateful for the compliments yet wanted to retreat from the sudden proximity and noise. Trying not to draw further suspicion about their abilities, encouraged attention toward Izuku by praising his drawing too. When the kids saw Izuku's crude attempt, an uncomfortable silence lasted 3 seconds before laughter broke out. Izuku's eyes filled with tears and the light left his expression. Guilty, stood and performed a simple, crowd-pleasing magic trick, the detachable thumb drawing gasps and praise from the children. The two teachers noticed Izuku's distress but did nothing to help. The bell rang to signal the end of school and the children hurried to gather their bags and leave, their attention moving on as quickly as it had focused. Sighed in relief and turned to Izuku, who was wiping tears from his freckled cheeks. They grabbed some tissues from the box on the desk and offered them to him, apologizing sincerely for drawing attention away from his unfinished drawing and acknowledging that it had been uncool. Izuku sniffed, accepted a tissue, and bowed his head in shame before mumbling that the drawing was actually finished. You let out an awkward sound and smiled comfortably. You reassured Izuku awkwardly that it was still a very nice drawing, laughing that the other kids had no idea what they were talking about. You weren't great at cheering people up because you couldn't read expressions well, but you still made the effort. Izuku was quiet for a moment, then returned a tiny grin and said that it was okay. He knew he wasn't good at some things, drawing included, and he thanked you for the kind words, calling you nice. You thought he was too precious for the world. You turned away dramatically and clutched your chest as if your heart had been struck. A single tear appeared in one eye. Before Izuku could ask, you cleared your throat and turned back. You held out your hand, the classroom lights catching your skin, and asked if he wanted to walk to the front of the school together with a feigned confident smile, hoping he would accept. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. He returned the smile and took your small hand, agreeing to walk with you. The two of you left the school with hands still clasped. The other kids outside made teasing sounds and whispered. Izuku blushed. You assumed it was from embarrassment at being laughed at, while in truth he was flustered by the contact. You remained blissfully unaware, thinking you were simply holding your first friend's hand and that there was nothing wrong with platonic affection. When you saw Minato and Izuku's mother talking, you ran to them, dragging Izuku along. You greeted Minato and Izuku's mother cheerfully. Minato smiled contentedly, and Inko commented that Izuku looked even more adorable in person and asked if you were Izuku's new friend. Izuku nodded and, fidgeting with the edge of his shirt, shyly asked if you could eat dinner at their house that night. Inko turned to Minato for approval. Minato agreed and suggested a sleepover after dinner with a grin. You and Izuku gasped and then eagerly agreed, pleading with Inko to let you stay the night. Inko laughed and welcomed you into her home. Meanwhile, Katsuki leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, studying you and Izuku like an open book. He couldn't understand what made you so special that the class accepted you so quickly. On top of that, you hadn't spoken to him all day, which made him angry. He wasn't sure whether it was because you had taken all the attention or because you spent the day with Izuku instead. One of Katsuki's winged friends observed that the new kid had made a good impression. The child with the long finger Quirk asked Katsuki if they could show you their secret base tomorrow. Katsuki didn't answer right away. He kept staring at you, determined to show you that he could be a better friend than Izuku. Days became weeks, then months, and before you knew it, almost a year had passed in your new life. There were times you stared at the ceiling, wondering what your true purpose was and whether you would ever wake up from this pleasant dream. Honestly, you did not want to wake up. Aside from your old nanny, there was no one in your original world you truly cared about, and no one cared about you. That thought hurt. Being with Katsuki and Izuku eased that loneliness. Katsuki was a friend. Izuku was your best friend. The sleepover after your first day of preschool became a weekly tradition that lasted until high school. You and Izuku spent a night a week at each other's houses, enjoying those nights. You favored Izuku slightly, but that did not mean you enjoyed Katsuki's company any less. He took you and Izuku on trips around the restricted forest to play pretend games with his other friends. Only once did he invite you to go alone. Izuku was unhappy at that and insisted on coming along. You promised to make it up to him the next day and left him behind for that day, swallowing the guilt when you saw his heartbroken expression. You loved Izuku, but you wanted to develop a friendship with Katsuki if there was any chance of changing him. In autumn, Katsuki dragged you out to play in the fallen, brightly colored leaves. He let you choose the first game, and you chose the least competitive one, hide and seek. You made a rule that hiding spots couldn't be more than 15 feet away to keep things fair in the vast forest. Katsuki announced that he would begin his search. You suppressed a giggle and tuned your senses to track his movements, hiding in a bush beside a dry tree, confident that he would never find you. After a few minutes of his taunting, Katsuki suddenly grew quiet. His silence was more unsettling than his loudness had been. Only the wind rustling the leaves filled the space. Before you could give up, tiny, firm hands grasped your shoulders and pushed you out of the bush. You and Katsuki tumbled through the damp leaves and dirt until he pinned you gently and grinned cockily from above. Katsuki declared that he had caught you. Katsuki told you you needed to be smarter with your hiding places and that if a psycho were chasing you, you would be dead in no time. Then he laughed and promised he would protect you. You joined him in laughter and subtly pushed him away. You thanked Katsuki kindly and meant it. You reflected that if he had not let you into his group, you would not have known what to do with your new life. You were already counting the days until Katsuki developed his explosive quirk, and you feared how that would change him. You thought you would miss the way he was now, and you worried that his future followers would encourage disruptive behavior. You wondered if there was anything you could do to change that, but in the back of your mind you knew it felt inevitable. It seemed like a fixed future and you doubted Katsuki would listen to you if his ego became that large. Katsuki watched your happy expression as you sat on the ground. Your clothes and face were covered in mud, but you were grinning like you had found a rare card. He had begun to observe you whenever he could, even if it was only for a second. Seeing you smile because of him made him feel like he was on top of the world, and he wished you could always hang out like this. Unfortunately, Izuku tended to be clingy and always interrupted when Katsuki tried to talk to you alone. Katsuki asked you if he could ask a question. You told him to go ahead. He bluntly asked why you always spent more time with Izuku than with him and whether you liked Izuku. You were taken aback, then smiled and explained that you did like Izuku, but only as a friend. Katsuki reacted with disgust and flinched away, then made an awkward remark about their relationship. You scolded him for his language and pointed a tiny finger at him. Katsuki mimicked your tone and movements, and you realized his question had been about the nature of your friendship. You clarified that you did not mean you liked Izuku romantically, you liked him as a friend only. You began to bring up your past but stopped yourself with a stifled cough. You went on to explain that in your old neighborhood you had not had many friends, that you had been shy and did not know how to talk to people without feeling awkward. You said you saw that in Izuku, and despite Katsuki being technically Izuku's only friend, he tended to underestimate or brush Izuku aside. You told Katsuki that nobody deserved to feel like nothing and assured him that you liked both Katsuki and Izuku equally. You said you wanted the three of you to be friends forever and asked if that would be cool. Katsuki rolled his eyes and said he was fine with that, wondering why you had to get so serious over a simple question. Then, with cheeks reddening, he admitted that if Izuku were more like you, maybe he would not seem so lame. You stood up, jabbed your elbow into Katsuki's arm, and teased that he liked you too. Katsuki growled, his cheeks flushed, and he threatened that he would beat you in the game. You accepted the challenge, daring him to try. The next day, sparks and small pops erupted from Katsuki's palms and his classmates consistently praised him. Peers called the quirk awesome and lucky, and the teachers commented that it would grow into an amazing ability and be perfect for a future hero. You cringed at the praise, knowing how easily admiration could feed a superiority complex. You worried about the crude, arrogant, short-tempered, and aggressive person Katsuki might become. Katsuki asked you what you thought of his quirk, his voice carrying a hint of desperation for your opinion. You were surprised that he wanted your thoughts. You felt both flattered and concerned. You told him that his quirk suited his personality and congratulated him, clapping lightly in support. Katsuki brightened at your approval. You realized that the two of them had now acknowledged you as a friend and that you were being drawn further into their story. It felt too late to step back. Watching Katsuki's quirk, you faced the most important question in your life. Would you have a quirk as well? You glared at your bunny plushie with exaggerated intensity and spent half an hour trying everything you could think of to trigger a quirk, determined to know whether you were powerless. Predictably, nothing worked. You groaned in disappointment and flopped face down on your bed, wondering if you were really quirkless. You feared you would not be able to attend UA with Izuku and Katsuki, that you would fall behind and be forced to watch from the sidelines while the others faced hardships. The thought that Katsuki and Izuku might eventually forget about you made your stomach drop. You refused to accept being left alone again and reminded yourself there had to be something you had not tried yet, something you missed. Quirks were supposed to manifest no later than 4 years old, and you were 4 now. You clenched your fists and muttered that you would find a way. Name pleaded to the bedroom's ceiling for a sign from whatever ice sky deity had brought them here. At that moment, a leaf floated in through the window and landed on the bed. Name gingerly picked up the leaf by the stem. Its orange-reddish color reminded them of Katsuki. A soft smile tugged at Name's lips at the memory of the hide-and-seek game with Katsuki, a past that felt both too recent and impossibly far away. Katsuki had grown from a cocky, charming child into someone with a superior streak, and his treatment of Izuku had worsened. Name had tried to correct Katsuki and defend Izuku, but it had felt hopeless. Looking at the leaf, Name felt sorrow. Sooner or later, choosing sides would be necessary, and that knowledge hurt because Izuku would be the one to stand with. It was not that Izuku did anything wrong. Name loved him dearly, but continuing to associate with a bully was not fair to Izuku. Name hoped for a future reconciliation with Katsuki after his character development, but for now, distance felt inevitable. Despite detesting how Katsuki's quirk had changed him, Name admired its power. The idea of creating literal explosions from the palm was intoxicating. Daydreaming about it felt harmless after all. The last time Name had wished for something, it had come true. Imagining themselves wearing Katsuki's hero outfit and soaring above buildings, Name gripped the leaf tighter without realizing it and made a daring wish. They wished for Katsuki's explosion. Instantly, small, loud sparks burst from Name's hands, burning holes into the leaf and filling the air with a smell of smoke. In surprise, Name stumbled off the bed and fell onto the floor. The leaf slid free and landed on the carpet. In stunned disbelief, Name whispered to themselves, wondering how sparks had formed on their hands. Minato called down the hall, asking if Name was okay and saying she was coming to the room. Panic flared. Name fanned the smoke away with their hands and scrambled to find the burned leaf. There would not be time to hide it before Minato entered. As Minato reached for the doorknob, Name yanked a blanket from the bed and tossed it over the leaf to cover it. Minato burst into the room with messy hair and wide eyes and asked what was wrong. Name insisted that nothing was wrong, trying to sound casual and blaming a nearby family barbecue, saying they had fallen out of bed and were fine. Minato sniffed the air and asked if something was burning. When she noticed how far Name was from the bed and asked how they had gotten there, Name acted clueless and offered evasive answers until Minato decided pursuing it further would be pointless. She told Name she would finish cooking dinner and warned them not to do anything reckless before shutting the door. After Minato left, Name exhaled, straightened the bed, and retrieved the burned leaf. A grin spread across their face at the impossible confirmation. The wish had manifested Katsuki's quirk. It seemed similar to Monoma's copying ability, but whereas Monoma needed physical contact to copy someone else's quirk, Name appeared to access a quirk by imagining themselves using it. Details like time limits or storage capacity were still unknown. Mischief returned. Name looked at the bunny plush and, with a mischievous grin, began to experiment. They tried a few quirks on the plush, mimicking Mina's acid, Todoroki's ice, and Mirio's permeation. The plush was unrecognizable by the time you were done. You felt incredibly guilty afterward. Minato cleaned your room every day, and if she noticed that the bunny plushie was missing, she would ask questions. You had to fix it and fast. Then a very dark thought crossed your mind. You told yourself you had only tested hero quirks so far, but wondered what would happen if you tried villain quirks. You briefly considered that Chisaki's ability might restore the plushie and make it look as good as new. You scolded yourself that you could not take the easy way out by using the quirks of bad people. You reminded yourself that quirks themselves were not inherently evil. People made choices that turned them into tools for harm. Quirks like black hole, erasure, and even one for all could be used selfishly. You thought of Toga and how she could help injured people, Kurogyari and how he could move civilians out of danger quickly, and Chisaki and how his talent could rebuild matter into useful forms. These people had powers that could be used for good, but they often chose destructive paths. Quirks could be both tools and weapons. You closed your eyes and pictured wearing a creepy plague doctor mask and holding a dull gray sphere that disintegrated into powder, then reshaped itself into a cube. You wished for Overhaul's power. Your hand reached for the mangled bunny and you hesitated a moment before grabbing it by the face. The plush crumbled into dust in a way that reminded you of Shigaraki's ability, and then you reassembled it to look like it had before. You whispered to yourself that it had been easier than you had thought. You wondered if this quirk could copy anything. Temptation to do many of the mischievous things Minato forbade rose, and you felt like someone powerful who could act without consequence. You thought of how Katsuki might feel and why he seemed arrogant, and you told yourself not to abuse the power too early, invoking Uncle Ben's old saying that great power comes with great responsibility. You stopped experimenting for the day, but the thought that you might copy powers from outside your universe lingered. You gave in once more, imagining Spider-Man's suit and web swinging. Small slits opened on your wrists, and with a flick of your hand, threads of webbing shot out and stuck to the wall. You thought this was beyond groundbreaking and felt tears of joy at the idea that you could copy any quirk or power. You finally decided that was enough for today. That was the day you realized what overpowered really meant, though you did not yet understand how much trouble such a gift could bring. A few days passed, and you learned more about your peculiar ability. You decided that nobody could ever know about this power. You now understood why All Might had insisted Izuku not tell anyone about One for All. If villains learned of your ability, they would stop at nothing to find you and take it by force. You shivered at the thought of someone like All for One or Chisaki hunting you down. As much as you would love to be an idealized hero, you could not risk your safety or the safety of those you cared about, which for you were Minato, Izuku, and Katsuki. You summarized how your ability worked. You could copy any quirk, power, or ability regardless of medium. You had a time limit of 20 minutes per quirk and 10 minutes per power or ability, and you could use only 3 powers or quirks at once. You were certain that with practice the ability would become stronger. Just because you could manifest the most powerful quirks did not mean you would know how to use them immediately. You would have to train in secret. Izuku and Katsuki had transferred to UA when they were 15, which meant you had 11 years to learn your quirk and to build the stamina and strength needed to survive UA. You thought you could get in. You recalled that even students with weak quirks had made it through. You told yourself it was doable. Minato took you along to run errands and warned you to stay close and not wander off, speaking with strictness. You found grocery shopping incredibly boring. No matter how much you begged Minato for a treat, she either told you to wait or refused outright. In some ways she reminded you of Aizawa. Tired, blunt, and hardworking. You begged Minato dramatically, tugging on the edge of her cardigan and claiming you were dying of boredom. Minato assured you that it would only take 5 minutes. You argued that she had said that 10 minutes ago and complained that you were fading away. Minato reminded you that you were alive and breathing, and you jokingly pretended to look around for a non-existent deceased grandmother. Minato decided she had had enough of your theatrics. She stopped the cart, rummaged through her purse, and produced an old portable game console. She explained that it had been a gift from her father when she was about your age and that it had kept her entertained for hours. You accepted it gratefully and settled down to play while Minato finished the errands. Minato explained with an exhausted voice that she had not used it in forever, that it held no value for her anymore, and that Name could do whatever they pleased with it, asking them to stop causing a scene. Name did not notice the shoppers staring as if they had grown another head. Name grinned bashfully, bowed, and apologized to the other customers. Name thanked Minato gratefully, turned the dust-covered console on, and began to play. A few minutes of shopping later, Minato stopped in front of the restrooms and asked if Name could watch the cart while she used the facilities. Name responded with an absent-minded affirmative and kept playing. Minato sighed, already regretting lending the console, and retreated to the women's restroom. Name leaned against the wall and focused completely on the game, fingers moving with practiced ease. A small hooded figure in another aisle watched. At first the boy was only interested in the console. He thought about whether he could snatch it and run. He loved video games more than anything. Before he could act, Name noticed him. Alarm bells rang in Name's head, and their instincts directed their attention to the figure, who observed them intensely. The boy flinched when their eyes met his red ones. He hesitated, uncertain whether to flee or approach, his indecision keeping him rooted in place. Name felt a surge of recognition and excitement. The boy was Shigaraki Tamura in his child form, a character Name had long admired and even considered a fictional crush of the adult version. The mixture of being unnerved by the presence of a future antagonist and thrilled by the chance to meet one of their favorite characters left Name conflicted but eager. Name waved and offered a friendly smile, holding out the console for Shigaraki to take. Shigaraki regarded Name with cautious suspicion. Name introduced themselves as Name, last name, and asked for his name, already knowing the answer. Shigaraki paused for several seconds, then gave his name in a quiet, raspy tone. Shigaraki stepped closer and yanked the console from Name's hands, beginning to frantically press the buttons and shut out everything else. The screen displayed a sudden defeat, and Shigaraki howled in frustration before stomping his foot in anger. The shoppers turned to watch, annoyed. Name thought they owed Minato an apology for the commotion. They reached out and gently touched Shigaraki's trembling hand, reassuring him that it was just a game and suggesting a simple breathing exercise to calm down. Inhale for 4 seconds, exhale for 2. Shigaraki followed the guidance. His breathing slowed and became steady. When Name judged him calm enough, they placed their palms over Shigaraki's hands. His crimson eyes widened and he became motionless. Name guessed that the boy had not had much physical contact with others for a long time. They explained how to use the controls to beat the final boss, guiding him through the mechanics. Shigaraki absorbed the instructions and, when he began to get the hang of it, Name let him continue on his own. Minato was taking longer than expected in the restroom. Name's gaze flicked to Shigaraki's face. His skin showed evidence of his quirk, but he still had the features and energy of a child. Name thought about confronting Kotaro Shimura and adopting Shigaraki themselves if they could change things. In the game, Shigaraki's eyes sparkled with joy and his smile was contagious. In that moment he was not the harsh future persona people feared. He was Tenko, a child whose innocence had been taken and who would later be manipulated. When Shigaraki finally defeated the boss, he pumped his arms in the air and cheered. Name laughed softly and offered the console to him if he wanted to keep. Shigaraki stared in disbelief, skeptical that a stranger would be so generous. Name explained that they did not really need the console and that he seemed to enjoy it far more, adding that he looked cool. Name offered a fist bump. Shigaraki hesitated, then shyly tapped his fist against Name's. Name's eyes brightened, and without thinking about the possible consequences, they embraced him in a tight hug. Shigaraki froze, stunned by the unexpected kindness. Then he slowly returned the firm hug, careful not to let all 5 of his fingers touch you. You thought you could die happily, though you much preferred not to. The memory played like a theme as you remembered crying after finishing Undertale's pacifist route. Shigaraki surprised himself by thinking he never wanted to let go. You had shown him the tiniest bit of affection, and he folded faster than a lawn chair. Unfortunately, the tender moment did not last. Minato exited the bathroom and gasped at the sight of you hugging a small, strange-looking boy. Before she could question you, Shigaraki pulled away and bolted out of the store without looking back. You caught yourself from almost falling on the cold tiles. Minato raised a brow and asked who that kid had been and where your console was. You chuckled awkwardly and explained honestly that he was your new friend and you had given the console to him because he did not seem to have much fun at home. Minato sighed, grinned, patted your head, praised your kindness, and suggested going to your favorite restaurant after paying. You gasped, jumped up and down, and thanked her enthusiastically. It would not be the last time you met Shigaraki. He definitely wanted to see you again and would make sure that it happened, no matter the cost, even if it took years. Ever since Katsuki manifested his quirk, attention had turned to you and Izuku because you were part of his friend group. Children and teachers constantly asked if you had developed a quirk yet, and you either avoided the subject or lied that you were still waiting. The kids reassured you that your quirk would come soon, which only made your anxiety bubble up. You knew you had to come up with a proper name for your quirk to move forward with your plan to attend UA, but you could not reveal the full extent of it without inviting unwanted attention. You also could not copy a quirk of an existing hero or villain. That would be suspicious. So you thought of a power from another universe. It could not be too overpowered, but it could not be useless either. You found yourself imagining Quicksilver's abilities: superhuman speed, agility, stamina, strength, and reflexes. You planned to dial those powers down so Katsuki would not become jealous. You did not want him to hate you, though it felt inevitable once you chose Izuku over him. You even fantasized about wearing Quicksilver's suit and using his speed to nab an ice cream cone. When you imagined it, adrenaline and the urge to run flooded you. All right, you thought, you had your quirk? How would you play it off? As if the universe had heard you, the winged boy in your friend group accidentally bumped into a male teacher carrying a tray of juice cups. The teacher gasped and warned everyone to look out. Suddenly the world slowed until it came to an abrupt halt. Izuku and Katsuki stared in mixed horror as the juice hung in the air. A fly that had been buzzing around the room stopped mid-flight. Everything looked like one giant picture begging to be altered. You walked casually toward the teacher and analyzed the frozen juice. You took the tray from the teacher's hands, grabbed the cups, and scooped up the juice floating in the air one by one. You even took a sip, noting the apple juice with a small nod. When the task was done, everyone began to move again. The fly resumed buzzing near your ear. You paused time once more and, annoyed by the pest, flicked it away with a quick motion. You muttered for it to go away. Then you stepped forward, checked your invisible watch, snapped your fingers, and let time resume. Chaos followed. Your friends screamed and covered their faces, expecting to be soaked. The teacher staggered, bewildered to find his tray gone. The fly hit the wall and fell still. You presented the tray to the teacher with a proud grin. Your peers gathered around, praising and congratulating you on the manifestation of your quirk. Classmates exclaimed that you had grabbed the tray so fast that they could not even see you move. The long-fingered boy remarked that you had saved them and looked to Katsuki for confirmation. Katsuki studied the scene with narrowed eyes. His classmates were admiring you the same way they admired him. Your quirk had definitely saved him from a sticky humiliation. It was undeniably cool, but Katsuki could not bring himself to admit it. Whether it was envy, pride, or both, he could not name the feeling. Katsuki scoffed and insisted that if he had not been caught off guard, he could have easily blown the juice away. He punctuated his claim with a small explosion that rocked the room. Immediately the attention swung to him, and the children split over whether he had been right. That division was new. Until now, whatever Katsuki said or did was treated as law. But when it came to you, of course it was different. You couldn't help but be irked by Katsuki's smug comment, so you replied sarcastically that sure, he could have evaporated juice in less than a millisecond. Katsuki's smirk faltered as his eyes hardened on your face. This kid had an ego the size of Mount Fuji. Someone needed to humble him as soon as possible, you thought with a frown. Izuku added that your quirk could help a lot of people and stop bad guys, and that it was as strong as Katsuki's. Your eyes widened and the room fell silent. Oh, Izuku's such a sweet, trusting child. Because Katsuki's self-importance stretched higher than the stratosphere, he was likely pleased to hear that even with your snark. You prepared yourself for the outburst you expected, but instead Katsuki gave Izuku the most vicious glare a child could muster and then ordered him to shut up, insisting that no one should compare his quirk to anyone else's. Izuku shuddered at the harsh tone and stammered, asking what he had done. You stepped in front of Izuku and told Katsuki it had been just a compliment and not to take it so seriously. Katsuki rolled his eyes, dismissed it, and stomped back to his table. The other children took the hint and returned to their activities, leaving you alone with Izuku. Murmured that so it begins, knowing this would not be the last time you would have to stand up for Izuku, but accepting the responsibility gladly. Izuku asked what you had said. You sighed and gave him a thin smile, telling him it was nothing and that he shouldn't let people talk to him like that. You advised him that if he wanted to be a hero he had to learn to defend himself, especially from JRKS. Izuku understood without you saying the nickname. He frowned and stared at his small feet. He confessed that Katsuki was so much stronger and that he couldn't fight, that he didn't even have a quirk yet and felt hopeless. You smirked and pointed out that you had managed something in less than 10 seconds. Izuku protested that you were different, that people like Katsuki and the rest of the class respected you while he felt like nothing. His green eyes began to well with tears. He had always been prone to tears, but the sadness still made your chest tighten. You held out your palms and asked Izuku to give you his. He did so without hesitation. His cheeks warmed as you examined his hands and freckled face. You told Izuku that it didn't matter if someone had the most powerful quirk in the universe without a kind, heroic spirit, they would be no better than a villain. That was why you had hope for him. You reminded him that he had shown a heart of gold time and again, and that even All Might would be proud. The only thing missing, you explained, was confidence. In order for something to be special he had to believe it was special. You tapped his forehead and then his chest to make the point. You promised that no matter what path he took, you would be there for him every step of the way. When he got his quirk, it would be just as cool as yours and Katsuki's, maybe even cooler. Izuku sniffled and asked if you really thought so. You admitted that you did, and added that even if he never got a quirk, he would still be the coolest person in the world to you. Izuku laughed breathlessly and protested that All Might was the coolest, and you teased that he could be second coolest. You and Izuku shared one last energetic laugh and then embraced. Izuku's hug was particularly tight. Katsuki watched with disgust, twisting his features, and muttered under his breath that those two never spent a second apart. One of the round-winged classmates commented that it seemed like you weren't getting any closer to Katsuki and that it was great you had received your quirk, thank goodness for that. If only they knew that your quirk could, in theory, destroy the whole universe if you wanted it to, you thought, a dark half-joke you pushed aside. Katsuki answered bitterly that he was thankful as well, though his grip on his crayon tightened. Since day one he had believed he deserved your attention more than Izuku ever could. Despite your protestations that you cared for them both equally, Katsuki could see how much Izuku meant to you. He watched the way Izuku looked at you, like you hung the stars, while you remained oblivious to Katsuki's own feelings. Heat and trembling began in Katsuki's palms. The crayon in his small hand melted. He berated himself inwardly, convinced he was far better than Izuku and wondering why you couldn't see him the way you saw Izuku. He did not register the melting crayon until a friend pointed it out with concern. One of the children called out that Katsuki's crayon was melting and asked if he was okay. Katsuki stared at his red-stained palm for a long moment, then wiped it with a tissue and shrugged it off, saying it was nothing. He knew it was far from nothing. The thought of losing you to Izuku made him afraid. Back with you and Izuku, he still had his arms wrapped around your neck and whispered that he did not know what he would do without you. You suggested not to think about it and to return to the group. Izuku agreed, let go, interlocked his fingers with yours, and led you back to where Katsuki and the rest of your friends were. Being around Katsuki felt like living next to a ticking bomb. There was no predicting what rude comment, bizarre idea, or literal explosion might come from him. His treatment of Izuku had worsened to the point that he had started calling him the degrading nickname Deku, meaning useless. It angered you greatly that Katsuki continued to kick Izuku when he was already down. You fought back because Katsuki's teasing was turning into outright bullying, and you couldn't stand by and watch. Izuku, with disheartened eyes, asked why Katsuki was being so mean. Katsuki and his goons laughed. Your fists clenched in a ball of rage. You called out, and everyone stopped as their attention focused on you. You pointed out that the first 4 letters of Kachan's last name could be read as the word for idiot, and you told them they should learn not to bully innocent kids who had done nothing wrong. Katsuki let out a sharp tsk and grinned cruelly at Izuku, saying that Izuku had done something wrong simply by being born. His followers agreed hastily, and you could tell Izuku was moments away from tears. You took a step toward Katsuki and demanded that he take it back. Katsuki froze for a second at your boldness, then smirked and challenged you, daring you to do anything about it. You replied that you would tell his parent if he kept it up. Katsuki scoffed and mocked you for being a snitch, suggesting your stand was an attempt to protect someone close to you. You accidentally used a nickname for Izuku, and you regretted it as Katsuki's 3 followers started teasing you both with a childish rhyme. Katsuki mocked the idea that you two had nicknames and suggested, with contempt, that you might as well be a couple. You corrected him, stating that Izuku was your friend. Izuku made a small, disappointed sound at your words. Katsuki scowled, calling you a liar in his head. You said you would not stand by and let him make fun of Izuku, your eyes fierce. Katsuki's jaw tightened. When Katsuki told Izuku to go away and that he was a burden, you suddenly shoved him to the ground. You cracked your knuckles and warned you would make him regret his behavior. Katsuki's followers chanted for a fight. He rose quickly, torn between not wanting to hurt you and fury at seeing you defend Izuku. Dark energy gathered in his palms. Before you could strike, Izuku placed a hand on your shoulder and, with a steady look, pleaded for you not to fight Kachan because you would both get in trouble and he did not want either of you hurt. You snapped out of your haze and acknowledged that Izuku was right. Picking a fight with Katsuki would only make things worse. You sighed, called Izuku by his nickname, and told him that this place wasn't worth staying in. As the two of you prepared to leave, Katsuki grabbed your collar and yanked you away from Izuku. He unleashed a sudden blast of energy toward Izuku, who cried out and fell to the ground clutching his face. Izuku lay there stunned and in obvious pain while Katsuki loomed over him, furious, insisting he did not need Izuku's protection and warning that if Izuku came near the others again, there would be consequences. You reacted instinctively and struck Katsuki in the nose. Katsuki yelped and clutched his face. His followers rushed forward but he shoved them back before they could reach him. You demanded to know why he would do something so cruel when you thought you were friends. You wondered if you had done something wrong to provoke him. Unbeknownst to you, your presence here was already altering things in ways you would not notice for years. Katsuki's attention shifted from his aching nose to your face. He realized that hurting Izuku had caught your attention, and in that realization he felt something important. Those moments with you, however fraught, were precious. He wanted more of your attention, and he resolved to get it, even if you looked at him with disgust. One of Katsuki's followers dramatically claimed that you had broken Kachan's nose. Another insisted you would be in big trouble. You stood your ground and explained that the fight had already been over, that Katsuki had thrown the first hit, and that you had only defended Izuku. You said Katsuki would be the one in trouble and instructed the others to take him home and tend to him so they would not all get punished for bullying a kid. Reluctantly and grumbling, the group helped Katsuki to his feet and left. With the others gone, you rushed to Izuku's side. He lay on the ground like a broken toy, his face flushed and streaked with tears but not permanently harmed. You gently told him that they were gone and urged that it was time to go home. Izuku took your hand and stood, his eyes still downcast. He asked, in a small, broken voice, why Kachan hated him so much. You answered that Kachan was jealous, and even though the explanation was meant to comfort, it was the honest truth. The reason Katsuki bullied Izuku was because he was insecure about his own abilities and how others perceived him. He also felt threatened by Izuku's unrelenting determination. You hoped things would stay true to canon, that soon Katsuki would overcome his fears and accept Izuku's help. Izuku sniffled and then tackled you in a tight, anxious embrace. He asked if you would never leave him and whether you would hurt him like Kachin. You blinked in surprise and replied warmly that of course you would, returning his hug. Izuku finally lifted his eyes from the ground and looked at you with courage in his watery eyes and flushed cheeks, promising that when he got his quirk he would protect you forever. You felt a sudden, overwhelming affection for him, your heart clenched by how earnest he was. It hurt to know that for the next few years Izuku would be ruthlessly bullied by Katsuki and his peers for being quirkless, and you resolved that you would never abandon him, no matter the cost. You clasped Izuku's hand and led him back to his house, where you had to lie to his mother about how he acquired his injuries at Izuku's insistence. The next day, Izuku continued to seek out Katsuki even after everything that had happened the day before, with you following closely. It was Izuku's nature to be forgiving, perhaps overly so. You stayed near Katsuki not because you believed in a mutual friendship. Katsuki did not seem to value you, at least not openly, but because you wanted to make sure nothing worse happened. Katsuki and his friends protested your presence, but Katsuki surprisingly quieted them. The incident at the park seemed to vanish from his memory. He never mentioned it again. If he had not been part of the group, it would have broken up long ago. Moments of tension and awkwardness grew within the small circle of classmates, a frenemy, and your best friend. Eventually your fears were confirmed when Izuku's quirkless status became known. You defended the timid boy fiercely, silencing whispers and gossip with a cold glare. You did not deny that you took a small satisfaction in watching the bullies shrink away. They deserved to feel the weight of their actions. The children whispering behind Izuku's back reminded you of your own bullies from your previous life. You wished you had had the backbone then that you now mustered for Izuku. You could not understand how people could be so heartless toward those who were different. You vowed to yourself, old gods and new included, that you would never ruin another kid's life. A few days later you started telling an exaggerated story about being asked to donate to a children's fund, mockingly asking what children had ever done for you, which made Izuku chortle and tell you that you had a strong imagination. You and Izuku walked home from school together. Minato planned to make Izuku's favorite dish for dinner, and you were going to watch a few classic films at a sleepover. It had been a week since the Deku naming incident. Everything seemed resolved on the surface, but you knew things were irrevocably different. Katsuki had changed in a way you did not understand. He remained arrogant and continued to belittle Izuku even when you were present. His behavior toward you was confusing. Sometimes he would do reckless things and then look your way as if hoping for your approval. You tried to admonish him, but your words often fell on deaf ears and he would leave looking dejected. You wanted to understand him better, but you dared not pry into his mind. You had attempted once to read a stranger's memory but had only managed a glimpse before they collapsed. At that moment you and Izuku halted when you heard the cries of another child and the sound of a sharp explosion in the distance. You let out an exaggerated groan and activated Quicksilver's speed, glancing at Izuku who looked frightened for the child's safety. Izuku stammered that the blast sounded like Katsuki and that someone was being hurt, pleading that they had to do something. You nodded and both of you ran toward the commotion without hesitation. When you arrived, it was as you feared. Katsuki and his two companions were confronting a frightened brown-haired boy. Katsuki taunted him, saying he was weak for crying so easily and making the boy feel small. Izuku dashed to the boy's side, offering comfort, while you kept your gaze fixed on Katsuki. Katsuki seemed to savor your attention. You pointed at Izuku and ordered Katsuki to stop the harassment before you did something you might regret. Katsuki's expression hardened. He told you that you had only escaped his last punch because he had let you, and urged you to ditch Izuku and join him instead. You interrupted with clenched fists, refusing to join in picking on weaker kids. Katsuki warned you to step aside before you got hurt and formed a small explosive spark in his palm. Izuku rose to his feet, fighting back tears, and demanded to know why Katsuki was being so mean and making the boy cry. He raised his shaky fists and declared that he would protect the boy if Katsuki kept hurting him. You declared that you would stop him yourself. You stepped forward sideways to stand beside him and then corrected that you would stop him together. Izuku shuddered in relief, reminded that he was not alone. Katsuki's eye twitched. His thoughts spiraled. They chose him. The protagonist chose the useless Deku over him. Why did they hate him so much? Why did Deku get to be with them, have sleepovers with them, have dinner with them after school, earn a nice nickname, earn their care? Katsuki's mind strained to comprehend the reason. You steeled your nerves, ready for the confrontation that seemed inevitable. Katsuki clenched his jaw and tears pooled in his crimson eyes. He shouted through his heartbreak that if they wanted to be with Deku so badly, he did not care anymore. He hated both of them. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he yelled his pain. Izuku asked if Katsuki was okay, genuine concern in his voice, and then jumped back when Katsuki barked at him to be quiet. The park fell very still. Katsuki's small hands scrambled to wipe his tears away. When his cheeks were dry, he turned and walked away slowly. His two companions froze. One of the goons began to ask where Katsuki was going, but Katsuki cut him off with an infuriated glare. His two friends yelped and, uneasy, agreed to follow. Only after Katsuki was out of sight did you realize that he had actually walked away from a fight. He and his group had been expected to rough Izuku up and leave him shaken and sore. Instead, he had left. Your jaw dropped. You glanced at the hurt kid and then at Izuku. Both of them shared your bewilderment. Izuku muttered uncertainly whether they had won. You answered that they had not. None of you knew what to make of it. Time moved quickly after that day. When you arrived in this world, you had been 3 years old, and in the blink of an eye 7 years passed until you were now 10. You and Izuku remained close, but your friendship with Katsuki was fractured. After the park incident, Katsuki did not try to interact with you anymore. The next day, when you attempted to speak to him, he shot the angriest, most passionate glare your way and told you to get away from him, that he did not want to see you again. You stopped trying. You accepted that Katsuki hated you. The truth was different. Katsuki did not understand his own feelings yet, but he cared for you deeply in a way that made his heart ache and swell at the same time. He wished he could take back what he had said to you. He had not been able to conceal his hatred for Deku, whom he blamed for taking you away from him, but he could never bring himself to hate you. He would never confess how he cried himself to sleep that night. He resolved to train to become the strongest hero he could be and hoped that one day you would be by his side again. You were currently sharing a warm pretzel with Izuku while strolling through the bright stalls and carnival games. A classmate had won an all-expenses-paid field trip to the amusement park, and Minato had lent you 10,000 yen, enough for lunch, cheap prizes, and a few treats. You spent nearly half your money spoiling Izuku. If he were not such an angel, he could use that adorable face of his to his advantage. He hugged a huge All-Might plushie you had won at the strength tester with a delighted grin, thanking you warmly for the plushie and the pretzel. You told Izuku it was no problem and asked where to go next. Your eyes scanned the rides and sideshow attractions. The Ferris wheel caught your attention, and fortunately the line was not too long. When you suggested the Ferris wheel, Izuku agreed eagerly and you both joined the line. Your eyes widened when you noticed a boy with spiky white hair standing ahead of you. You recognized the hair instantly and wondered whether it could be 𝖎𝖏𝖌𝖐. Doubt nagged at you, wasn't he supposed to be incapacitated after losing control of his quirk? You tried to convince yourself it was just someone who looked like him. You tried to act casual while sneaking glances, but you soon realized you were almost at the front of the line. The Ferris wheel seats fit 2 people, and it looked like you might be paired with the white-haired boy. Izuku noticed and gasped, then tugged at your hand, saying that you would not be together. You apologized absent-mindedly and explained that it was only one ride and that you would be together on the next one. You could not miss the opportunity to confirm whether the boy was 𝖎𝖏𝖌𝖐. Izuku was persistent and suggested moving to the back of the line to improve the chances of being paired together. You laughed and insisted it was fine, but Izuku kept trying to persuade you, and his persistence began to irritate you. Name took a deep breath and patiently explained to Izuku that they knew he was used to being together a lot. Name loved being with him, but they were already at the front of the line and there was no point in moving. Name promised that after this ride they would go wherever he wanted and spend the rest of the day together. Izuku became quiet and looked downhearted, and he mumbled that he did not see why they could not be together now. Name offered a pinky promise for just this one ride. Izuku hesitated, then agreed and linked his pinky with name S. An amusement park worker announced that name and 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖡 were next. Name pulled away without looking back at Izuku's lonely face. Izuku's hand lingered for a few seconds before 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌 boarded the ride with the other boy. Jealousy tightened Izuku's chest as he watched how close they sat. Izuku thought there was no point in staying in line if name would not be with him and decided he would leave the line to wait for them to get. A voice said that it 𝖎𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖡, and Izuku let out a sharp yelp, stumbling back until his spine hit the iron railing. He looked up and recognized Katsuki standing on the opposite side of the railing, watching him. Izuku managed to stammer and ask what Katsuki was doing there and whether he had been following them. Katsuki smirked and said he had been walking around and then saw that name had apparently abandoned Izuku. Izuku snapped that they had not abandoned him, then realized his outburst had drawn stares from people behind him and flushed with embarrassment. He explained frantically that name had only wanted to ride the Ferris wheel, there had not been room for both of them, and that name would be back and they would spend the whole day together. Izuku grew fidgety again as he spoke. Katsuki rolled his eyes and scoffed that the two of them spent the whole day together every day and it was a small miracle name had not gotten tired of Izuku yet. When Izuku pressed for clarification, Katsuki taunted that whatever Izuku thought he had would not last and that sooner or later, name would see him as a loser. For a moment Izuku's eyes dimmed before he forced himself to look back up and insist that name was kind and amazing and did not deserve such talk. He demanded to know why Katsuki could not just leave them alone, pointing out that Katsuki had made it clear he did not like either of them. Katsuki's expression faltered for an instant. He remembered, though without admitting it, how sad name had looked when he pushed them away. He had watched name stop trying and walk away, and the memory stung. Katsuki leaned in and said harsh things about Izuku being quirkless and unworthy, calling him a weak pet and claiming the only reason stayed was out of pity. Izuku shuddered and clamped his hands over his ears, trying to block the words while his eyes grew glassy. The people nearby watched with pity and discomfort but did not step in. Before Katsuki could continue, name grabbed Katsuki's collar and pulled him back from the railing, scolding him for bullying Izuku during the 10 minutes they had been gone. Name warned Katsuki to leave immediately or they would pocket sand him. Katsuki blinked and asked what pocket sand was. Name feigned curiosity and reached toward a pocket, and Katsuki blurted that carrying sand in a pocket was strange and called name weirder than Izuku. Name shrugged that it was better to be a safe kind of weird and dramatically shooed Katsuki away. Katsuki growled, threw one last glare at Izuku, and melted into the crowd. Name turned back to Izuku, who looked close to an emotional breakdown. Name wondered what Katsuki had said to him and soothed him, asking him to take a deep breath. Izuku complied. People in the line muttered impatiently for them to move, but name fixed them with a fierce, judgmental stare and told them they would hold the place. Name reminded them that none of them had defended Izuku. The crowd fell quiet. Izuku whispered that he was fine and did not want to bother anyone. Name reluctantly agreed and they left the line together. Outside the queue Izuku's breathing steadied and his eyes were no longer wet with tears. Name handed him a cup of water, and he accepted it gratefully. Name asked what Katsuki had told him this time. Izuku choked on the water, coughed, and answered with a downcast face that Katsuki had said the only reason stayed with him was because they felt sorry for him. You pressed your lips together and told Izuku that the boy was a bully and that you hoped he would stop soon. You added that if he continued, you would protect him. Izuku swallowed hard, his heart racing, and he gave a small, pitiful smile as he told you that you were always protecting him and that he wished he could protect you too. He apologized for being a bother. You punched his shoulder lightly, and Izuku cried out before asking what that had been for. You said it had been because he had said something foolish and assured him that he was not a burden. You told him to get it through his head, that he was your best friend and that you cared about him. Izuku's eyes widened, his cheeks flushed, and his heart beat faster than usual. He understood that you meant it platonically, but hearing it from you made his eyes shine. He nodded in silent agreement. You offered to buy ice cream to cool off and took Izuku's hand, guiding him through the crowd. Holding his hand felt natural and calming, and as Izuku looked at your hand and the back of your head, a pleasant realization hit him. Even if Katsuki seemed superior in many ways, Izuku had something Katsuki did not. He felt guilty for the thought, but it was true. Both he and Katsuki cared for you, and your arrival in their lives had changed everything. Izuku could see the regret on Katsuki's face, but Katsuki's pride kept him from admitting his mistake. Izuku hoped Katsuki would hold on to that pride a little longer, because he was not ready to share you. At the ice cream shop in the amusement park, you paid for your and Izuku's favorite flavors, and the two of you rested on a bench enjoying your cold treats. You swung your feet and said that the day had been fun and that you wished every day could be this cheerful. You thanked him for being understanding about the Ferris wheel ride and said you had enjoyed it a lot. Izuku then asked who the boy on the Ferris wheel had been and whether you had gotten his name. You were startled for a moment and tried to choose your words carefully. You told Izuku that the boy had been nice and talkative and that his name had been 𝖎𝖏𝖌𝖎𝖓. You offered the information with a strained smile and sorrowful eyes. When Izuku asked what you had talked about, you looked up at the clear blue sky and fell quiet, remembering the earlier ride. 30 minutes earlier, you could hardly contain your grin as you took your seat beside the white-haired boy on the Ferris wheel. 𝖎𝖏𝖌𝖎𝖓 appeared indifferent, staring out the window with vacant turquoise eyes. You wondered how it was possible that he still looked so young, given what you knew of his past. It occurred to you that the timeline might have changed. As the ride began, you glanced back at your freckled best friend, who stared at you with helpless eyes until the gondola lifted and obscured him. Your legs shook with nerves. The silence on the ride felt heavier than when Shigaraki had appeared at the store. Determined to break the tension, you cleared your throat and made small talk, asking if 𝖎𝖏𝖌𝖎𝖓 liked. He looked at you as if you had grown another eye and responded with a non-committal guess that he did. You flailed inwardly at the awkward start and tried to steer the conversation to something that mattered to him. You mentioned the fight between All Might and the lizard-like villain and praised All Might's coolness, expecting 𝖎𝖏𝖌𝖎𝖓 to share your admiration. Instead, 𝖎𝖏𝖌𝖎𝖓 shot back that someone would soon surpass All Might and declared that that someone would be him. You pretended to be shocked by his outburst. When he realized he had spoken too much, he covered his mouth in horror and urged to be quiet and finish the ride. You recognized the fear in his voice, fear of failing his father's expectations, fear of weakness. You noticed a recent-looking burn on 𝖎𝖏𝖏𝖏's arm and fetched a water bottle from your backpack. You uncapped it and used your quirk, imagining a familiar, calming charm and moving the water as if performing a gentle healing technique. The water flowed softly and gleamed as it made contact with his skin. 𝖎𝖏𝖏 flinched and scowled, exclaiming that it hurt. You explained that you were treating the burn and that it might be uncomfortable but would help him feel better, speaking with a touch of sarcasm to keep the mood light. 𝖎𝖏𝖏 raised an eyebrow when he saw the water glow faintly and asked with suspicion whether it was your quirk. You nodded and confirmed that the burns looked painful. You insisted that he let you help. 𝖎𝖏𝖏 clenched his arm and studied your face, looking for any sign of deception. Fortunately, your expression held steady. After a few seconds of internal struggle, 𝖎𝖏𝖏 huffed in a childish way and handed you his arm. You thanked him and began tending the burn. 𝖎𝖏𝖏 hissed when the water touched the wound, then sighed in relief as the pain faded. After a minute, when the burn looked healed enough, you guided the remaining water back into your bottle. 𝖎𝖏𝖏 gasped, an astonished smile spreading across his face as he remarked that his arm looked as good as new and thanked you profusely. You smiled and asked how he had gotten the burn, warning that playing with fire was dangerous. 𝖎𝖏𝖏's expression fell. He looked out the window with a frown and explained that he had been training by himself. He said the doctors had told his parents and him that, because of his mother's ice quirk, he wasn't immune to heat, so his family kept telling him to stop pushing himself. He insisted he could handle the pain. He declared that his only purpose was to surpass All Might so that his father would finally notice him, his voice wide-eyed and full of desperate intensity. You shifted uncomfortably, feeling your chest tighten at 𝖎𝖏𝖏's relentless need to impress endeavor. You thought about how destructive that drive could be. You told him that it was a lot of pressure to put on himself and that he should be enjoying his youth while he still could. You asked whether he had come alone or with family. 𝖭𝖏 replied that his mother had brought him and his 2 younger siblings to enjoy the park while his father trained with his youngest brother, Shoto. Yu brightened at the mention of Shoto. 𝖭𝖏 went on to say that since his birth their father had acted as though he and his siblings didn't exist, calling them useless. 𝖭𝖏 said he hated their father but still felt compelled to prove himself. He wondered if that was wrong. Yu admitted that it was natural to want to impress parents, especially when they seemed distant. You shared that you hadn't seen your own parents in a long time and didn't know if they still cared. You said you understood some of what he was feeling, but cautioned him that harming himself to reach a goal wasn't healthy and would only worry his family more. 𝖭𝖏 listened with a hesitant but stubborn look. He shook his head and insisted he couldn't give up after coming so far. He declared he wasn't a child anymore, claimed to know his body best, and insisted he could handle the training. He vowed to grow stronger and said nobody, not even his father, could stop him. You watched him with anguished eyes, wanting desperately to make him understand that his path could end badly. You warned him again that he was still young and shouldn't rush into dangerous things without breaks and care. You urged him not to do anything reckless. 𝖭𝖏 brushed you off, annoyed at your persistence. You tried one last tactful appeal, telling him that with such a powerful quirk he wouldn't get far if he kept injuring himself, and that accepting limits and working through them with patience would serve him better on the road to surpassing all might. He looked uncertain, then grunted his agreement. The ride shook and the attendant opened the door. 𝖭𝖏 stood and said the conversation had been interesting but that he had to leave. You clasped his hand tightly without thinking. 𝖭𝖏's eyes widened at the sudden contact and at your flushed face. You laughed nervously, apologized, and then asked his name. 𝖭𝖏 gave a small smile, introduced himself as 𝖭𝖏, and called you strange but not in a bad way. He vowed that next time he would be stronger than all might, and then he ran off. You hurried after him and called for him to wait. He stopped and looked back impatiently, waiting to hear what you had to say. You warned him not to go to Sekoto Peak, saying you had heard it was dangerous and you didn't want him to get hurt. 𝖭𝖏 raised his brows in surprise, rolled his eyes, and pouted that you nagged more than his mother. He told you he'd be fine, waved off the warning, and disappeared into the crowd, possibly heading into danger. Your heart broke at the sight. You felt helpless at the thought of him getting hurt. You couldn't call anyone to stop him because you didn't know exactly when he would go to the wildfire. You told yourself you had failed 𝖭𝖏. You scolded yourself for being foolish and feeling powerless. The thought of having to face 𝖭𝖆𝖆 later made the future feel even more terrifying. A version of 𝖭𝖏 changed and scarred by fire, someone altered by that choice. The image shook you, but it also strengthened your resolve. You glared at your feet for a moment, then reminded yourself that failure in one moment didn't mean giving up on saving him in the future. You still had to try with everything you had. You lifted your head and looked for Izuku. A furious growl escaped your throat when you remembered Katsuki near Izuku, making him cry as he often did. You cursed under your breath. Later, Izuku apologized and worried that something he had said might have upset you. You shook your head and told him he had not done anything wrong. You had just been remembering something painful, but it was not important. You explained that you had been talking about family and future plans and that you had wished you could have spoken with him longer. Izuku reacted awkwardly and made a small sound of sympathy, his expression unreadable. After finishing their ice cream, Izuku put a hand on your shoulder and offered a comforting smile. He suggested going to the bumper cars and teased that he could not wait to beat you. You smirked and challenged him, denying he would win. Then both of you laughed and ran toward the ride he chose. So many things in this world had changed. You had met villains and several of the main characters from the story. The future felt uncertain and frightening, but one thing was clear: you were no longer alone. For now, you decided to ignore the terrible possibilities and enjoy the day with your best friend, hoping the canon timeline would remain intact and that you would stop attracting trouble. Unfortunately, that hope would prove misplaced. For years had passed. The numbers still surprised you. It felt like yesterday when you had been mysteriously transported into your favorite manga. As the canon storyline approached, you trained relentlessly to improve combat, stamina, and your quirk. You often snuck deep into a secluded forest where you knew no one would find you, practicing multiple quirks and powers until you felt exhausted. It was difficult to lie about your origins and your abilities, but you convinced yourself it was necessary. Quicksilver's super speed had been invaluable and had practically guaranteed you a ticket to UA. You learned the hard way that some powers were too dangerous to use freely. Techniques that would cause massive destruction were off-limits. Not only would they invite chaos, they felt hollow and boring to you. You loved feeling powerful and enjoyed using favorite characters' abilities, but you also wanted the rush, fear, and excitement of a fair fight. When a battle threatened to spiral out of control, you kept a few devastating options in reserve to end things quickly, even though relying on them felt like a compromise. One morning before classes began, you waited for Izuku in homeroom. The day the plot was set to start had arrived. Your phone had buzzed with a news alert reporting that an amateur monster villain had been taken into custody near Tatooine Station. You suspected Izuku had witnessed the incident, which explained his delay. Classmates filtered into the room and formed their usual cliques while you sat alone. A few tried to make small talk, and you replied kindly, but tersely conversation with large groups had never been your preference. You always felt a step removed from everyone else, and you disliked how they whispered about Izuku behind his back. You glanced at the clock and thought 5 minutes until class starts. Where are you, Izuku? Izuku burst into the classroom a moment later, out of breath from running. He greeted you warmly, cheeks flushed from exertion. You ruffled his sweaty green hair and returned the greeting in a playful tone. He chortled and playfully swatted your hand away, though you could tell he secretly liked the contact. A few classmates giggled and whispered at the sight of your easy affection, but you ignored them. Katsuki watched from a corner of the room, perched on a desk with 2 acquaintances beside him. One of them muttered that the lovebirds had arrived, and the other remarked, with a smirk, that he was surprised they had not taken things further yet. Katsuki stayed unusually quiet, though his temper simmered just beneath the surface. He breathed deeply to steady himself, forcing patience and rationality to keep from storming across the room and unleashing his quirk on Izuku. He cast a final glance at your smiling face. For a fleeting second his expression softened, then hardened again when he remembered you were not smiling because of him. He vowed that things would change. The bell rang and the teacher entered with a stack of papers, and the classroom settled into the lesson. Your thoughts kept drifting elsewhere. Katsuki's abrasive behavior had not improved. Izuku remained kind and compassionate, though he could be clingy and quick to tears. Minato continued to be patient and wise, and you had not seen Shigi or Tuya. Worry gnawed at you, and you feared that Tuya might already have met a tragic fate. The sense of helplessness was crushing, but you reminded yourself not to dwell on what could not be changed. What's done was done. All you could do now was move forward and become a hero so that no other kids would end up like Tuya and Tamura. You wanted to defend civilians who could not defend themselves, but you could not do that with only a speck of your power. Sooner or later they would find out. Would they hate you? Distrust you? What would Katsuki and Izuku think? You told Izuku everything, not everything, but enough to make him trust you completely. You did not want to imagine how Katsuki would react if he discovered the true extent of your quirk after all those years. Being a hero meant giving your all, and you could not even do that without risking everyone. Hours passed and the end of the school day neared. You doodled hero costume concepts in your notebook, taking care not to include any capes, recalling 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖡 advice. Katsuki noticed your pencil moving and, brow lifted in suspicion, sneaked a look at your drawings from a few desks away, wondering why anyone would be doodling hero costumes. The teacher then announced that, as third-year students, it was time to start thinking seriously about their futures. He tossed the career aptitude tests into the air and declared that many of them clearly wanted to pursue the hero track. As he spoke, several classmates began to activate their quirks. The room filled with excited demonstrations that ranged from impressive to ridiculous, and someone in the class pointed out that one of the bigger students was even shirtless while using his quirk. The teacher scolded them to hold their power usage in check and reminded them that no quirk use was allowed in school, but his words barely registered as the students continued to show off. You and Izuku squirmed at the overwhelming display. Izuku looked especially tense because he was the only quirkless person in the class. You felt a pang of sympathy and resolved to help him someday so he would not feel so alone. Katsuki snapped that he was not like those losers and that he was the real deal, and the class responded with boos. One student asked whether Katsuki really thought he was better than everyone else, and Katsuki challenged them, daring them to take him on. He believed he was superior because he had been praised his whole life and because his quirk was powerful. You tried to suppress a laugh. You knew he was not ready for the larger world where others might have stronger abilities, and that he was in for a reality check. The teacher checked his tablet and noted that Katsuki had impressive test results and might get into 𝖎𝖑𝖌. A few students murmured about whether he was aiming for the national school and reminded one another that the school had only a 0.2% acceptance rate, calling it impossible to get into. Katsuki tapped his desk and explained that that exact improbability was why 𝖎𝖑𝖌 was the only place worthy of him. He proudly proclaimed that he had aced all the mock tests and expected to become more popular than All Might and the richest, most famous hero in the world, and that it would all start with 𝖎𝖑𝖌. The teacher then asked Midoriya and the protagonist if they also wanted to attend 𝖎𝖑𝖌. Izuku flinched at the mention of his name, and Katsuki froze for a moment. You remained composed and waited as the class erupted into laughter, not at you, but at Izuku. The laughter dragged up painful memories of your own bullies. The jeers, the mockery, the way they made you wish you could disappear. A classmate called Izuku a freak, and the cruel comment only intensified the laughter and the sting of the moment. The protagonist balled their fists as classmates mocked Midoriya and suggested that at least the protagonist stood a better chance of getting into the hero course. Others insisted that without a quirk there was no way to be accepted. Izuku rose from his seat and anxiously explained that the rule had been removed and that he could be the first quirkless student admitted. Katsuki growled and unleashed a flashy blast that rocked the classroom and sent Izuku tumbling to the back. Katsuki barked that Izuku was worse than the rest of the rejects and would embarrass the school by trying. The teacher and the other students said nothing to defend Izuku, and the scene filled the protagonist with bitter disappointment. Izuku crawled backward until his back hit the wall and frantically insisted that he was not trying to compete, pleading that the others had it wrong. He added sheepishly that he had wanted to be a hero since childhood and, despite not having a quirk, he could still try his hardest. Katsuki's palms smoked as he sneered that Izuku would never hang with the best and would fail the exams. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes while the class laughed. The protagonist decided that was enough. They clenched their jaw, forced slow, steady breaths to calm their shaking hands, rose from their seat, pushed past the other students, and reached out a hand to help Izuku up. Izuku looked up at them with a grateful expression and accepted the help. The protagonist told Izuku not to cry and that the others were not worth his tears. The classroom fell silent and the students recoiled at the intensity of the protagonist's glare. The protagonist accused them all of being pathetic for taking joy in bullying a boy who had never asked to be quirkless, and then focused on Katsuki, calling out the cruelty and cowardice of tormenting someone who could not easily fight back. Katsuki's eyes widened at being confronted so directly. The whole class gasped as tensions rose. No one besides the protagonist had dared to stand up to Katsuki before. That provoked a reaction from him. He taunted that the protagonist was still clinging to Deku and bringing disgrace by being associated with him. Katsuki's words struck the protagonist, but they replied that Izuku was a true friend who chose to keep moving forward, learning from the heroes he admired. The protagonist expressed confidence that Izuku would pass the hero course and vowed to give their all as well, to protect those who could not protect themselves from bullies like Katsuki. Part of the protagonist's motivation had been mixed with less noble dreams, a desire for wealth and recognition, and a comfortable life filled with the things they loved and companions who would share the morning routine with them. They kept those private fantasies to themselves and refocused on the present. Silence persisted in the classroom. The protagonist's breathing was heavy, and they felt the heat of agitation that had built up for a long time. Izuku wrapped his fingers around the protagonist's wrist with a kind, patient smile that grounded them and reminded them they did not deserve such loyalty. The protagonist asked the teacher if there were any more announcements. The teacher shook his head no, and most of the students hurried out, leaving only the protagonist, Izuku, Katsuki, and two of Katsuki's goons. The five stood facing each other, waiting for someone to act. The protagonist's heart pounded. They activated Quicksilver's power, grabbed Izuku, and pulled him along while they gathered his belongings. A lanky, long-fingered goon tried to reach out, but the protagonist easily dodged the attempt. The protagonist told Izuku to collect their things and promised to cover him. Izuku agreed and worked quickly. The goons made no aggressive moves. They clearly knew that crossing Katsuki in the wrong way would have consequences from him. When Izuku returned with his bags, he realized his analysis notebook was missing. Katsuki held it up with a cruel smirk and taunted them. One of the goons mocked that it looked like a diary and sneered at the idea that Izuku took notes on how to be a hero. Another called him delusional. The protagonist snapped at the group to be quiet and demanded that Katsuki drop the notebook. You warned that you would do something they would regret, already preparing to use Quicksilver's speed. Katsuki sneered and taunted that you had been barking a lot and wanted to see if you could bite. Izuku tried to defuse the situation, urging them to be reasonable and to give the notes back. The millisecond you saw Katsuki move as if to use his quirk on the book, you activated your power and everything around you froze into a giant still frame that only you could manipulate. In moments like this you were reminded that you really were that main character. A rush of freedom washed over you as possibilities danced through your head. Childish pranks presented themselves, but you decided to choose something effective and not mean-spirited. You snatched Izuku's notes from Katsuki's hand, returned them to Izuku's backpack, zipped it closed, and secured the straps across his shoulders. A mischievous grin appeared as you grabbed Katsuki by the waist and positioned him between his two followers. With a few guided adjustments, you altered his stance so that his heating palms faced his lackeys. Humming sweet dreams, you skipped toward Izuku. You hung your own backpack behind you and cradled the back of Izuku's neck to protect him as you whisked him from the classroom to the entrance of the dark tunnel beneath the bridge where you knew the slug villain would appear. This should be far enough, you thought. Katsuki would never find you here. You couldn't help imagining his reaction, but that would wait for another day. You counted down. On 3, small bursts flashed from Katsuki's palms toward his goons. On 2, the 4 boys began to move in sync. On 1, everything happened at once. Orange sparks erupted and startled the goons. The bursts briefly overwhelmed their senses, forcing them to clutch at their faces and double over on the floor. They cried out in shock and pain, insisting that Katsuki had done it to them. Katsuki looked at his underlings with confusion and panic. He protested that he had been holding Deku's notebook and had not been near them, bewildered as his hands and body had been moved without his control. He felt as if he had been a puppet in someone else's hands, and the realization pointed straight at you. Katsuki roared your name and spun to confront you, but you and Izuku had already vanished. He cursed under his breath, shaken that he had lost both of you in less than 30 seconds. He had underestimated you for too long because you remained friends with Izuku. Now, as cold sweat formed on his forehead, he wondered what your quirk really was. People whispered it might be as strong as his. The thought unsettled him. He resolved to push himself harder, determined to prove he was the strongest by scoring highest on the entrance exam so you would notice him instead of Izuku. Izuku took in the new surroundings with bewilderment. One moment he had been trying to get Katsuki to return his notes. The next moment he and you were outside the school. You gave him a few seconds to steady himself, since traveling at such speed was disorienting. Izuku asked how you had moved them outside so fast and where Katsuki had gone. You told him to relax and focus on what mattered, that he and his notebook were safe and far from those boys. He rummaged through his backpack and found his notebook intact, gasping in relief. He peppered you with rapid questions about whether you had used your quirk and how it worked, eager to write everything down. You smiled and indulged him, explaining that your quirk was called Quicksilver and allowed you to move at incredible speeds and react almost instantly. Izuku scribbled notes furiously, muttering aloud about the possibilities and asking imaginative, rapid-fire questions about running at supersonic speeds, traveling long distances, and other feats. You put a gentle stop to the barrage of questions and teased him for rambling. He blushed and apologized, explaining how excited he was to learn more. You praised Izuku's kindness, unaware that he kept numerous other notebooks devoted entirely to you. He had detailed everything from your favorite foods to your habits during sleepovers, hiding those journals beneath the floorboards in his closet. He treasured them almost as much as his hero analysis notes. Izuku asked if you were still on for the sleepover that weekend, already assuming your answer. You confirmed enthusiastically that you would not miss it for the world, and then urged him to hurry before Katsuki and his followers discovered their absence. As you both headed toward the tunnel, you put a hand out to halt Izuku. He asked what was wrong, confused by your pause. You thought about how you did not want Izuku to get trapped by the slug villain in the tunnel, but if you avoided the tunnel entirely, Izuku might miss a crucial encounter that would change his path. The dilemma weighed on you, and you made a quiet decision about which risk to accept. Still, they did not want to see Izuku hurt, which was why 𝖭𝖆 suggested going first. Izuku stared at them, puzzled, and asked why. 𝖭𝖆 pulled a faux offended face and told him that he had no manners and that, since they had saved him, they should go ahead. Izuku thought for a moment before reluctantly agreeing. 𝖭𝖆 grinned and thanked him, but the grin faded the moment they turned back. They stepped into the tunnel together. It was unnervingly quiet until Izuku tried and failed to imitate All Might's laugh, breaking the silence. The slug villain then revealed himself. Izuku froze in terror, and 𝖭𝖆 steadied themselves despite the cold rising on their skin. The villain sneered that Izuku would make a perfect hiding place and then lunged. Izuku screamed and reached for 𝖭𝖆, but 𝖭𝖆 pushed him to the side to get him out of the villain's reach. Panic widened their eyes, but they kept their composure. They could have used their speed to escape or fight, but they accepted that the situation required a different course of events. They urged Izuku to run and braced for the attack. The villain seized 𝖭𝖆 and pulled them into sticky slime. The scene of restraint is omitted here to keep the narrative appropriate. The protagonist felt their strength ebbing and their consciousness beginning to fade. The slug villain spoke of taking over the body and told 𝖭𝖆 not to resist. Fear and suffocation blurred their thoughts. They tried to steady themselves and imagine a hero to find strength, but it grew difficult as oxygen and panic overwhelmed them. Izuku's hero notebook struck the villain and drew his attention. The villain turned and taunted Izuku, promising cruel vengeance once the possession was complete. Izuku, trembling and quirkless, pleaded for the villain to take him instead and to release 𝖭𝖆, screaming for help. All Might appeared suddenly, bursting up through the manhole while still holding his bag of groceries. He announced that there was no need to fear now that he was there. The villain lashed out, but All Might evaded and charged forward. He struck the villain with his signature Texas smash. The powerful blow produced a gust of wind that disrupted the villain's hold and freed 𝖭𝖆 in a non-graphic, decisive manner. 𝖭𝖆 clung to the last threads of consciousness, long enough to see All Might in action. Knowing Izuku was safe for the moment, 𝖭𝖆 let the world go dark. Later, Izuku begged for 𝖭𝖆 to wake, tears filling his eyes. All Might leaned in and gently rapped 𝖭𝖆's cheek to rouse them, and Izuku kept a tight hold on their hand. 𝖭𝖆 stirred and opened their eyes, then muttered a playful question asking whether All Might was an angel. All Might laughed and said he was not, only glad they were all right. 𝖭𝖆 expressed heartfelt gratitude and thanked All Might profusely, then offered to repay him with a friendly dinner as a way of showing thanks, adding a light-hearted comment about Minato. Izuku reacted with astonishment at 𝖭𝖆's boldness. All Might declined politely, saying that no repayment was necessary and that he was simply happy to have done his duty. All Might commented that the boyfriend should be proud, since he had stalled the villain long enough for All Might to save you. You and Izuku flushed in embarrassment for different reasons. You hastily explained that you and Izuku were only best friends and nothing more. Izuku stared at you silently, his cheeks red with blush as he listened intently, his grip on your hand never loosening. Disappointment filled him. He was reminded that no matter how hard he tried to win you over, you would always see him as a friend. All Might apologized for misreading the situation and for getting the two of you caught up in his heroics. He admitted that he usually paid more attention to keeping bystanders safe, but the city's sewer system had proven difficult to navigate, and he laughed it off. You and Izuku continued to gawk at All Might, both still trying to comprehend the fact that All Might was actually standing in front of you. All Might thanked the two of you, saying you had been a big help, and declared that he had captured the evildoer. He presented the villain trapped in a soda bottle like a showman, flashing a grin so bright it caught the late sun. Izuku exclaimed that he needed an autograph and rummaged for a pen. When he opened his notebook, he squealed because it was already signed by 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖡 in bold. You giggled as 𝖎𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖌𝖡 bowed and rambled about how 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖡's signature would be a family heirloom passed down for generations. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖡 approved with a thumbs up, and you laughed, telling 𝖎𝖒𝖌𝖡 he was too cute. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖡 said he needed to get the villain to the police and bid farewell, warning them to stay out of trouble. 𝖎𝖒𝖡 asked plaintively if 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖡 was leaving already. 𝖎𝖌𝖡 explained that pro-heroes were constantly fighting time as well as enemies and stretched his powerful legs to prepare to fly. You watched him depart rather than linger on anything else. You felt a pang of embarrassment and quickly refocused on 𝖎𝖒𝖡. You recognized the look on 𝖎𝖒𝖡's face. He did not want 𝖎𝖌𝖡 to leave yet. He wanted to ask so many questions, the most important of which could change everything. He glanced at you with worry but also did not want to leave you alone after what had happened. You forced a smile and told him you would be fine and that you would find him later. 𝖎𝖒𝖡 nodded in understanding and then quietly snuck up on 𝖎𝖌𝖡. 𝖎𝖌𝖡 announced he was taking off and thanked everyone for their continued support. His jump was so powerful that blossom petals blew into your face. You coughed one out and glared at it in mild disgust. 𝖎𝖒𝖡 was nowhere in sight, most likely clinging to 𝖎𝖌𝖡's leg. You let out a contented sigh. The plot was moving forward successfully. You were no longer needed, and you hoped the timeline would stay true to the story, that 𝖎𝖒𝖡 would discover 𝖎𝖌𝖡's true form, save Katsuki from the sludge villain, and learn how One for All had been passed down. You did not mind whether or not 𝖎𝖒𝖡 revealed the truth about One for All to you. After so many years, it was finally happening. 𝖎𝖒𝖡 was getting his quirk, and he would become the hero he had always wanted to be. You felt deeply happy to be involved in that journey and glad to be wanted. Your vision blurred as tears of joy rolled down your cheeks. The real story was beginning. It had gone just as you had predicted. Katsuki had been ambushed by the sludge villain, 𝖎𝖒𝖡 had attempted to save him, and 𝖎𝖌𝖡 had ultimately saved both of them, defeated the villain again, and even seemed to change the weather with a single punch. The news of the sludge villain attack was everywhere. You felt guilty and useless because you could have saved Katsuki if not for the need to preserve the timeline. The sun was setting. You sat cross-legged on your bed, anxiously waiting for a text, call, or video chat from 𝖎𝖒𝖡. The moment your phone buzzed, you answered without looking at the name, asking if it was 𝖎𝖒𝖡. A gruff voice on the other end said that it was not he was the one calling. You immediately recognized the voice. You realized you had forgotten you had Katsuki in your contacts and wondered why he had called. You remembered that when Minato had gotten you a cell phone for your 12th birthday, you had asked 𝖎𝖒𝖡 for his number at school. Katsuki had happened to pass by, overheard you rambling about how excited you were to chat, and somehow got your number. He had only ever texted a single "K" before ghosting you for years. You did not know why he had bothered to save your number if he never intended to use it. You smiled mischievously and teased, asking who "me" could be. Katsuki growled over the line that you knew who he was and to stop acting stupid. You could practically taste the annoyance in his tone, and it only fueled your playful side. You playfully said you did not know who "me" was and asked how you were supposed to know it was your emotionally reserved frenemy. Katsuki exploded, denying that he was emotionally constipated and shouting that it was him Katsuki Bakugo if that made you happy. The protagonist burst into wild laughter until their stomach ached. After a few deep breaths, they told Katsuki that they were very happy and asked if he needed something. Katsuki was quiet for a moment, then swallowed hard and demanded that they meet him in front of his house immediately. The protagonist blinked several times, shocked that Katsuki wanted to meet. Excited and anxious, they hesitated to ask why, but the call ended abruptly. The protagonist muttered that he was an a-hole and wondered if they should go. They worried that 𝖎𝖒𝖡 might call. He did not like being ignored, yet they feared the consequences of standing Katsuki up. Katsuki's house was only a 5-minute walk. The protagonist decided they would hear him out and come straight home afterwards. They let out a stressful sigh, slipped on their outdoor shoes, and headed to the door. Minato noticed and asked where they were going. The protagonist smiled and said they were meeting Katsuki because he wanted to talk about something. Minato gasped in disbelief at Katsuki's name, mentioning the recent attack by the sludge villain and how thankful she was that 𝖎𝖌𝖡 had arrived to help. She asked the protagonist to tell Katsuki she was glad he was okay, and then warned them to stay safe. The protagonist paused and called out that they would. Once the door closed behind them, guilt and shame settled in. They had not told Minato that they had nearly been suffocated by the same villain, and they did not plan to. Minato already worried about the protagonist taking the entrance exams. If she learned about the attack, she would be even more opposed. The protagonist knew their mother supported their dream of being a hero but was a constant worrier. The walk to Katsuki's house was uneasy. The neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional passerby, and the earlier attack had left the protagonist on edge. They kept their guard up until they arrived in front of Katsuki's house as the sun lowered and the sky took on a deep purple. The protagonist texted Katsuki that they were there. Soon after, loud voices came from inside the house and Katsuki opened the door, looking surprisingly casual compared to the school uniform the protagonist usually saw him in. Mitsuki called from inside that Katsuki's food would get cold, and Katsuki replied that he was just going to talk to someone for a moment and told her not to get worked up. As he came down the steps, the protagonist placed a hand dramatically against their forehead and teased that they were only a someone to him, which made Katsuki's cheeks flush. Katsuki grumbled that the protagonist should not call him that. The protagonist asked what was so important that he had made them walk all the way there, teasing him with the nickname again. Katsuki's face reddened and he groaned, forcing himself to calm down. The protagonist smiled inwardly. Moments like these, being annoying and seeing Katsuki annoyed in return, had been missed. In an ideal world, the protagonist thought they, Izuku, and Katsuki would be the best trio. Katsuki suddenly asked if the protagonist had seen the news. When they confirmed that they had, Katsuki added that Izuku had also been there. The protagonist was surprised. From Katsuki's tone it was clear he did not expect Izuku to have been involved. Katsuki explained, with bitter emphasis, that Izuku had not saved him and that he did not owe Izuku anything. The protagonist understood Katsuki's pride and admitted that All Might had done most of the work, but they felt that Izuku's attempt had helped motivate All Might to act. Katsuki did not know that. The protagonist offered to leave if that was all he needed to say, but Mitsuki opened the door just then and ran forward in delight, hugging the protagonist and scolding Katsuki for not telling her a friend was visiting. Katsuki and Mitsuki began to bicker while the protagonist stood awkwardly, debating whether to make a quick exit. Mitsuki grabbed the protagonist's hand, asked if they had eaten, and declared they would eat there that night because there was much catching up to do. The protagonist explained that Minato did not know they would be staying and that they needed to call her, but Mitsuki assured them she would call and explain so the protagonist did not have to worry. She then ordered Katsuki to get the protagonist a plate, and the protagonist agreed to stay for dinner. The protagonist's phone vibrated. It was Izuku. Panic rose how to handle agreeing to dinner with Katsuki's family while also not wanting to ignore Izuku. Katsuki, noticing the hesitation, told the protagonist not to answer and pointed out that they and Izuku were always together. Katsuki insisted the protagonist spend time with other people for a change, then gave one final glance before entering the house and intentionally left the door open for the protagonist to follow. "You have reached an ultimatum." You stood still for a moment, your face blank and hard to read. Katsuki held his breath and waited anxiously for you to walk through the door, silently urging you to choose him this time. When you finally sighed, pocketed your buzzing phone, and stepped inside his house, Katsuki released a breath he had not realized he was holding and hid his relief behind a smug grin. He let you know it was about time. You playfully punched his arm and told him to shut up. Unseen behind Katsuki's bushes, someone watched the exchange with a phone that kept dialing until it went to voicemail. Emerald eyes widened in disbelief at the sight of you choosing Katsuki. You spent the next hour feasting on Mitsuki's delicious meal while making small talk and answering a few of Katsuki's parents' questions about your life and future. Mitsuki nearly spilled her water when she discovered you were planning to take the UA entrance exam and asked what your quirk was called. You explained the basics of Quicksilver while glancing at Katsuki. He listened with a hard expression, still smarting from the humiliation you had inflicted on him and his friends. Privately, you smiled at the thought of proving yourself. Masaru praised your quirk, saying that with proper training you could stop villains in an instant. Mitsuki teased that you were making her blush, then insisted you spend the night instead of walking home after the recent slimy attack. She had already cleared it with Minato and pointed out the spare room upstairs with a bathroom. You thanked her with a strained grin, grateful for the hospitality but uneasy around Katsuki after everything that had happened. He still had not apologized for terrorizing Izuku and insulting you. Mitsuki asked Katsuki to show you your room. He rolled his eyes, stood up and led you upstairs. You thanked his parents for their generosity and wished them a good night. After showing you the temporary bedroom, Katsuki finished with a curt warning to ask questions now or never. When you shook your head, he walked past you. You expected him to leave without another word, and at first he seemed to, but then he asked whether you and Izuku were really going to the entrance exam. His crimson pupils fixed on you as he questioned the plan. You nodded with determination and told him there was nothing he could do to stop you. Katsuki scoffed and insisted Izuku would not last an instant in the exam and would not score a single point. He suggested that if you cared for Izuku, you would make him face the reality that he stood no chance. You groaned and told Katsuki to stop with that nonsense. You were tired of hearing the same insults and of him looking down on Izuku just because he had no quirk. You argued that Izuku had as much chance as anyone else and that even if you were his best friend, you could not make him give up his dreams. The fact that Izuku had tried to help Katsuki despite being powerless, you said, proved he had the heart of a hero. You would not let Katsuki bully him into giving up. Katsuki remained silent with his back to you. You called to him again and told him that despite your differences, one thing would never change: your feelings toward him. You described him as one of your best friends and thanked him for letting you join his group, saying you were happy he was safe and that you looked forward to the future with him and Izuku. Katsuki did not turn around, but he muttered that you were hopelessly sentimental and that you should get some sleep. He also told you that as soon as you woke up he wanted you gone. Then he shut the door without looking back. You deadpanned to yourself that this was probably his version of a good night. Katsuki was a tough nut to crack, but you reminded yourself that difficult races often brought the most rewarding prizes. One day he would open up to you. Until then you would train to become a powerful hero, if not the strongest, then at least close enough. A text from Izuku popped up and made your hands sweat. Izuku checked in, asking how you were and whether you were home. You hesitated, then chose not to tell the whole truth and sent a cautious reply instead. You went to bed with those thoughts spinning in your head, ready to face another day of training and the challenges of the entrance exam. You quickly added that before you went home you had stopped by Katsuki's house and he had told you how Izuku had tried to save him. You told Izuku that you were proud of him, that saving someone who had hurt you was both kind and mature, and that you did not know if you would have been able to do the same with your own bully. You assured him that even if he did poorly on the entrance exam, you knew he would be an amazing hero. You waited with bated breath as Izuku typed a reply. He stopped texting and called instead, and you took a deep breath and answered cheerily, greeting him. Izuku asked if you were lying, his voice carrying a tone you had never heard from him before. He sounded serious and disappointed as he explained that while walking home he had seen you in front of Katsuki's house and then go inside. He reminded you that you two had been best friends since you were 3 and that friends should tell each other everything. He emphasized that if you both were going to become heroes, you needed absolute trust, and he asked you honestly whether you were really at home. You swallowed the guilt and recognized that Izuku was worried about your well-being. You admitted that you had eaten dinner with Katsuki and his family and had stayed in a spare room for the night. Izuku gave a small sound of approval and asked you to promise no more lies between you. He said he had something important to tell you that only the two of you and All Might could know. Your jaw dropped as Izuku explained that he was to be All Might's successor and that he would soon inherit one for all to use himself. You already knew, of course, but his trusting you with the secret made you giddy. You feigned surprise and whispered so Katsuki in the next room would not hear, expressing how happy you were for him and how this would improve his chances at the exams. You suggested you should celebrate. Izuku replied that he would see you at school the next day and said good night. You hung up and lay flat on the bed, shaken. You promised yourself you would never lie to Izuku again. You knew his relationship with Katsuki was complicated, but you had not expected such a reaction from him. Sleeping in Katsuki's house felt strange but comfortable. You honored Katsuki's request to leave as soon as you woke, leaving behind a short thank you note for him and his parents. At school the next morning, Katsuki treated you as if you had not been to dinner with him the night before. It stung when your morning greeting went unanswered and his underlings gave you dirty looks. You felt embarrassed, unaware that Katsuki had kept your note and stuck it on his body mirror so he would be reminded of your presence and the care you still held for him, despite everything between you. The UA entrance exam was 10 months away. You spent the next 9 months training your various quirks and powers, forcing yourself into a strict sleep schedule and drinking protein shakes like a serious athlete. Your training left your limbs aching, but nothing compared to Izuku's challenges. He had once cleaned an entire trash-filled beach by himself using his strength. You had to balance training, schoolwork, and hobbies. One hobby was video gaming. A month before the exam, Minato surprised you with the latest console. You thanked her profusely and set it up immediately to start playing Minecraft. You joined a crowded server that included voice chat. While gathering logs in the woods for your cabin, a familiar raspy masculine voice called from behind, asking if you had any food for him and his friend because they were starving and the other players refused to share. You checked your inventory and found 6 pieces of bread and 3 uncooked mutton. You had been saving them, but you decided these 2 needed help. The player with the raspy voice had the username 𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖡 and a plain blue-skinned, faceless avatar. His friend used the username 𝖬𝖔𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖡 and had a scaled-looking avatar with wild purple hair. The coincidence made your eyes widen. 𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖡 growled, accusing you of being selfish if you were not going to share. You recognized the voice as Shigaraki's without a doubt. You told him to chill out and suggested that perhaps people had been reluctant to share because of their usernames. You dropped your 6 pieces of bread for Shigaraki, who immediately gave 3 to his silent friend. 𝖬𝖔𝖌𝖎𝖡 sent a brief thank you message in chat. You wondered why he did not speak, and Shigaraki explained that his friend preferred not to talk. Shigaraki asked whether there was a problem, his tone defensive. The narrator shook their character's head in disagreement, explaining that they would not force anyone to speak and that silent, mysterious characters were always the coolest. Iguchi, known online as Spinner, perked up. He had grown used to being viewed as a freak because of his lizard-like appearance and tried not to let the compliment sink in too deep. The narrator still did not know him or what he truly was. Suddenly the sky dimmed. Countless stars glittered along the horizon and the full moon provided the only light. Eerie ems and distant clattering echoed around them. 2 arrows fired from a skeleton narrowly missed the narrator and struck Shigaraki instead, sending him reeling in a dramatic anime-style burst. Shigaraki reported that he was down to 1 heart. The narrator announced that there was a dirt hut up ahead and urged the others to run, wanting to grab their hands to lead them. The narrator and Iguchi did their best to shield Shigaraki from the mobs that appeared and attacked. They sprinted until the 3 of them reached the beginner house. The narrator let Shigaraki and Iguchi enter first, then sealed the entrance with dirt blocks. 𝖬𝖔𝖌𝖎𝖡 commented that it had been too close, and both the narrator and Shigaraki agreed. Shigaraki asked if this was the narrator's first time playing, and the narrator nodded. Shigaraki chuckled and remarked that only beginners would make dirt houses. The narrator bristled and defended themselves, explaining that the dirt shelter had been a temporary refuge while building a cabin and offering that if they did not want to stay they were free to sleep outside. Shigaraki apologized and said they were fine staying. Minutes passed in tense silence, filled only by the distant sounds of the game. The narrator looked at Shigaraki and then at the last 3 pieces of food in their inventory. The narrator asked if Shigaraki still had 1 heart. When Shigaraki confirmed, the narrator used Mind Stone to fashion a simple furnace, cooked the mutton, and distributed 2 pieces to Shigaraki and Iguchi, noting that it would restore some health. The silence remained heavy and awkward, so the narrator broke it by asking what other games they enjoyed besides Minecraft. Shigaraki and Iguchi were taken aback by the genuine interest. What followed was a long, engaging discussion about favorite video games. Shigaraki disliked admitting it, but he found himself enjoying the conversation. He had thought 𝖬𝖔𝖌𝖎𝖡 the only decent mutual to interact with, but the narrator was proving to be a close second. When day finally broke in the game, the narrator surprised Shigaraki and Iguchi by inviting them to help build a cabin for the three of them. They were free to add whatever they wanted as long as it was livable. Instead of training for the exam, the three of them spent the afternoon building. When the cabin was finished, they laughed and cried in relief and delight. The cabin was a glorious amalgamation of three different creative minds. Shigaraki criticized the result as the biggest eyesore he'd ever seen, though his tone made it seem more like a teasing jab than a true insult. The narrator reacted dramatically and insisted they were not to speak ill of it, calling it their cabin and their home. Then, sheepishly, the narrator asked if they could stay in touch and be mutuals or friends. The two were stunned. After a moment of skepticism from Shigaraki, Iguchi spoke for both of them and agreed, asking what social media the narrator used. Nickname remarked that Minato's dinner had been delicious. That single question had been the start of a friendship with two kids who would later become notorious online adversaries. For the month before the entrance exams, Nickname spent 7 hours a week playing whatever multiplayer games Iguchi and Shigaraki picked. It thrilled Nickname to be mutuals with the gamer duo, but most of the time was focused on training for the UA entrance exam. The last 10 months of juggling training and gaming had been brutal, but Nickname believed the effort would pay off. The day of the exams finally arrived and the early start felt cruel. Nickname woke at 6 to exercise, shower, eat, and catch the bus to UA High School. Standing before the H-shaped building, Nickname felt awe at how much bigger it was than imagined. Nickname waited for Izuku outside the gates, thinking that Izuku must have swallowed a handful of All Might's courage to be running this late. When Izuku appeared, breathless and relieved, he told Nickname that they had made it just in time. Nickname grinned and offered a fist bump, urging them to show what they had. Izuku returned the gesture shyly and they walked toward their dream school together. Izuku looked visibly nervous. He had not had time to test his new power. Before Nickname could reassure him, a brash voice called out. Katsuki insulted Izuku and then told him to get out of the way, threatening harsh consequences if he did not. Izuku flinched. Nickname rolled their eyes and responded with a sarcastic greeting. Katsuki ignored it and brusquely bumped shoulders with Nickname, while Izuku tried to encourage everyone to do their best on the exam. Nickname felt their patience fray. Katsuki swung unpredictably between friendliness and abrasive coldness, and it was exhausting. Nickname repeated the word 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖌 silently as a calming mantra. Katsuki was not worth the energy. Nearby students were whispering about Katsuki and the previous slime villain encounter. The only silver lining from that attack was that Katsuki had been less aggressive toward Izuku afterward. Izuku breathed out in relief, regained his composure, and focused ahead, though he stumbled before taking a step. Uraraka arrived beside them and steadied Izuku, using her quirk to keep him from falling. She laughed softly as she adjusted him and then apologized for not asking before using her power, explaining that she thought he would not mind being caught. Izuku fumbled for words while Nickname laughed and thanked Uraraka for saving their friend. Uraraka dismissed the thanks and waved as she headed inside. Izuku had no interest in anyone but Nickname. The brief interaction with Uraraka mattered little compared to the years he had known Nickname. He told Nickname that Uraraka seemed nice and then urged them not to waste any time. Izuku clasped Nickname's hand and gently led them into the building, and Nickname felt warm as his fingers intertwined with theirs. Izuku blushed and promised to try his hardest to pass the exam for both of them. Inside, the lights flashed and the large screen with the UA logo illuminated the stage where Present Mike stood. Present Mike introduced himself and tried to hype the crowd. The hall remained quiet, and Nickname muttered under their breath that Present Mike's performance left much to be desired. Name thought that was what someone would say if they had no heart. In reality, Name had always felt bad for him in this scene, so they pushed back their embarrassment and shouted enthusiastically that it was time to get ready to rumble. Present Mike emphasized how the practical exam would go and asked if everyone was ready. When the crowd fell quiet again, Name cheered in response. Present Mike then declared that Name was officially his favorite person, which delighted Name. Name, squealed and told Izuku that Present Mic had called them his favorite person. Izuku gushed that he listened to Present Mic's radio show every day and thought it was amazing that all the UA teachers were pro-heroes. Katsuki rudely remarked that Present Mic was just flattering Name, because they were the only one loud enough to scream. Name flashed an irritated smile and told Katsuki they had a present for him, then made an obscene gesture. Katsuki growled angrily and demanded to know if Name wanted to fight. Name provoked him back by calling him a Roy Mustang wannabe. Izuku quickly calmed the situation before it escalated, but Name and Katsuki continued to exchange spiteful looks. Present Mic explained that the examinees would conduct 10-minute mock battles in urban settings and instructed them to brace themselves for action. After Present Mic finished, the students were to head to their assigned battle centers. Name saluted and affirmed that they were ready. Katsuki observed that the students were being split up so they could not work with friends. Izuku noted that although their examinee numbers were consecutive, they had been assigned to different battle centers, and he looked disappointed that they would not be able to work together. Name checked their paper and saw their test location was Battle Center C and felt the same disappointment about being on their own. Katsuki snatched Izuku's card and taunted him, saying that he had been looking forward to crushing both Deku and Name, and that Deku would be in trouble without allies to save him. Izuku's face fell, and Name cracked their knuckles in irritation. Katsuki clicked his tongue but backed off. Present Mic explained that points would be gained by using quirks to target 3 types of foe villains, with higher difficulty foes raising the score more. Attacking other examinees was strictly prohibited. He did not explain that rescuing other players could also earn rescue points, but Name already knew and planned to take advantage of that. Ida stood and asked a question. He pointed out that the printout listed 4 types of villains instead of 3 and criticized the official materials for the apparent mistake, insisting that UA students deserved accurate information. He also called out Izuku for muttering and told him to stop being a distraction. Izuku covered his mouth in shame and apologized. A few students laughed but quieted when they felt Name's angry aura. Name patted Izuku's head gently to soothe him. Present Mic thanked Ida and clarified that the 4th foe villain was worth 0 points and served only as an obstacle to be avoided. There was only one such obstacle per battle center. He advised listeners to focus on the point-scoring targets instead. Ida thanked him and sat down. Present Mic closed the briefing by reciting the school motto and encouraged everyone to go beyond. The students responded with the motto in unison, and Name joined in enthusiastically. Present Mic then wished Name luck and teased them to practice more than just studying. Before heading to their separate battle centers, Name tried to motivate Izuku and Katsuki one last time. Name pumped their fists and told Izuku that they believed in him. Izuku thanked them and said he would see them later, then walked away. When Name glanced for Katsuki, he was gone. Name pushed through a crowd of students and searched until they found him, then grabbed his shoulder to stop him. Katsuki snapped that they should not touch him, but he quickly recognized Name, and his expression softened for a moment before growing guarded again. He demanded to know why Name was there instead of in their battle center and asked if they wanted to fight. Name replied that there would be time for that later. They had only come to wish him good luck and to say they believed in him too. Their voice was soft and sincere despite lingering frustration. Katsuki's eyes widened briefly and his cheeks warmed, but he quickly composed himself and brushed Name off, insisting he did not need sentimental support and declaring his confidence that he would pass and score the highest. He told Name to stay out of his way and walked off. Name slapped a hand to their face with a scowl and wondered why they bothered. They returned to their battle center feeling dejected. Unseen, Katsuki stole a warm glance back at Name. His pulse quickened in a way that surprised him. Katsuki did not understand why he felt this way. He hated seeing Name hurt, especially when he was the cause, but he also needed to focus on his goal of entering UA. Plus, it was also your fault for choosing Izuku over him all those years ago. If he could become a hero, he would be able to live a comfortable life with you free of problems. Hopefully Deku would drop dead by then. You promised yourself you would prove you were so much better than him once and for all. Today's the day. The examinees in the battle center did not look the least bit anxious about the mock battle. In fact, most of them seemed confident about their chances. You scanned the crowd for familiar faces but found none. There were too many generic competitors. Your heart raced so wildly you were convinced you were going to have a panic attack. You had imagined this moment more times than Has-Been Hotel had ever cursed. Just stick with the plan and scoring points would be easy as pie. You activated Quicksilver. You stared ahead at the opening gates with determined eyes. 10 minutes was just enough time for Quicksilver, since the power lasted as long as the test itself. You had trained relentlessly to earn enough points to get into Class 1A alongside Izuku and Katsuki. But your last interaction with Katsuki had left you feeling more than determined. It left you spiteful. You wanted to rub your victory in his face and make him feel as humiliated as he had made Izuku feel for over a decade. You had a right to that feeling. Screw it. You were not just going to pass into 1A. You were going to pass with the highest score. Your fingers hovered over the button that would start your stopwatch. Present Mike, from atop the watchtower, called for the examinees to begin and reminded them that real battles had no countdowns, urging everyone to get moving. You activated your stopwatch. Time slowed abruptly. You dashed past your fellow competitors while they remained frozen at the gates. In an instant, you had the entire battle center and the locations of every foe villain mapped in your mind. You moved with superhuman speed and precision, neutralizing 39 two-point foe villains with a flurry of kicks and punches. Each target was incapacitated cleanly, like a scene out of an action anime. You kept careful track of your defeated targets. Katsuki had scored 77 villain points but 0 rescue points. You had 78 villain points now. If you could score at least 22 rescue points, you would pass with a perfect 100%. You checked the watch you had bought a week ago to track how fast you were traveling. 5 seconds. You had single-handedly scored more points in 5 seconds than anyone else. Everything was falling into place. The corners of your mouth curved into a proud grin as you exhaled. Now that you had essentially aced the initial scoring, you could let time flow normally and wait until someone needed help. All that winning had made you hungry. You ran to a nearby convenience store and bought a cup of instant noodles, 3 fried chicken legs, an 𝖎𝖒𝖌𝖎𝖌, and a bottle of water. Then you found an empty building where you knew no examinee would disturb your private meal. You took your time eating while humming a happy tune. Outside, chaos reigned. The clamor of frantic attacks and shouted directions reached you faintly as peers desperately searched for the remaining foe villains. They were confused and frustrated to find that many of the two-point targets had already been neutralized by a mysterious person. Other examinees shouted complaints about who destroyed the targets and accused one another of cheating. Frustration and disbelief rippled through the arena as competitors raced to find what remained. You could hardly stop yourself from laughing. It felt good to win. You couldn't wait to see Katsuki's reaction. He would lose his temper. A tiny camera watched your every move as you ate. A group of pro heroes observed the examinees through the many glowing screens that lined the observation room. They took notes on how each examinee used their quirks. Some relied on information gathering, others on speed or raw power, and the most successful students combined tactics, composure, and combat ability to rack up the highest scores. Principal Nizu noted that the examinees had limited information about villain locations and limited time, so strategy and calmness could be huge advantages. A female teacher pointed at your feed and questioned why an examinee was hiding inside a building instead of earning points. She enlarged the live video of you eating and asked for an explanation. Cementos raised an invisible brow and wondered aloud where the examinee had gotten food when there were no convenience stores nearby, requesting the examinee's name and score. Ectoplasm checked his tablet and confirmed that examinee number 1-9-8-7 had a real name listed as full name, and a score of 78 villain points and 0 rescue points. The room erupted in gasps and whispers as everyone tried to comprehend how such a high score had been achieved so quickly. 𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖊𝖏's shadowed blue eyes widened in shock. He remembered the kid who had asked him out 10 months ago after he had saved them from the sludge villain. Izuku had spoken highly of you many times during their training sessions. He had informed 𝖎𝖌𝖎 that you were incredibly fast, but 𝖎𝖌𝖎 did not expect it to be to this degree. Another male teacher insisted that it could not be possible and demanded to know how so many faux villains had been taken down in only a minute. Principal Nizu chuckled in amusement, observing that some humans failed to see the whole picture. He rewound the Battle Center C footage to before the gates had opened, focused on a lone two-pointer, and slowed the playback. The teachers watched as a blur struck the two-pointer and it was destroyed in an instant. The blur then vanished. All Might noted that it had moved too quickly to see and wondered what it had been. Ectoplasm returned his attention to his tablet and read the examinee's profile, explaining that the quirk was called Quicksilver, allowing movement, thought, and reaction at speeds far beyond normal human capabilities. He added that a future hero should not relax on a battlefield after defeating a few villains, then made a light remark about taking a snack break. A female teacher commented that the examinee had essentially passed the exam in less than a minute and that it was a new record. Another male teacher observed that the examinee barely seemed to be trying and that the real test had yet to come. Principal Nizu pressed a red button to awaken the unnecessarily gigantic zero-pointer and said he wanted to see how the examinees would react. All eyes focused on you with growing interest. What the teachers did not know was that you had chosen this building deliberately because the zero-pointer would emerge from the building next to yours. The earth rumbled beneath your feet. You stretched, cracked your knuckles, glanced toward the camera with a wink at the judges, and disappeared before the dust gusts arrived. Your peers stared up at the towering zero-pointer in terror. They had been told to avoid it, but this felt like nothing less than a disaster. From a few buildings away, you watched as the zero-pointer brought its enormous fist down toward the ground. You sprinted forward and moved examinees who were too close to the faux villain into an area populated with one-pointers, pulling them away from immediate danger. You cleared falling concrete debris by leaping from building to building, and you shifted people who would otherwise have been crushed. When time resumed, your peers blinked in confusion and realized they had been moved farther from the zero-pointer instead of being buried in dust. They shouted in bewilderment and scattered, fleeing the area where the zero-pointer was wreaking havoc. The mock battle had turned into a scramble for survival. You remembered All Might's lesson that a person's true character is revealed when they face danger. A true hero would do everything possible to protect the weak and defenseless, even if it meant making sacrifices. The teachers watched your still figure with growing confusion. All Might questioned aloud whether you were actually planning to confront the zero-pointer. Principal Nizu clapped and smiled, delighted by the display. Your mind did not dwell on the robot so much as on a single, urgent detail. A high-pitched voice with a familiar lisp cried out for help from the nearby building, claiming people were trapped inside. Your eyes darted to that structure and you saw its exits blocked by rubble. You had not noticed anyone inside earlier and had not cleared the debris. You reminded yourself to always check inside buildings. Present Mike announced that less than 2 minutes remained. That warning did not ease your distraction. The concrete blocking the exits was far too heavy to shift quickly by yourself. It was thicker and larger than you could manage in time. The zero-pointer was closing in and would reach you and the trapped examinees within a minute. You had no choice. You made a verdict: destroy the bot first, then rescue. You imagined yourself in 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖌𝖎 yellow jumpsuit, then you used his one punch to obliterate the mech in front of you. You wished you had 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎's strength. With less than 2 minutes left and lives on the line, you could not waste any more time. Until now, you had treated this test like a game. That was over. You were going to pull out the ultimate move you had learned from the son of a shepherd, Rolf. You took off your sports shoes and grabbed a single spare sneaker lying on the ground that another examinee must have dropped. You tied the laces from 3 shoes together so they formed a sort of 3-section staff. You launched yourself into the air toward the bot, leaving a small crater where you had stood. Your hair whipped as air rushed past your face. You gritted your teeth and stored all your strength in the arm holding your makeshift weapon. All Might had told Izuku that there were no combat points rewarded for taking on the humongous villain, but that there was opportunity, a chance to shine and show what one was really made of. He had urged him to clench his resolve and let out everything from the heart. You let out a battle cry in honor of your ancestors and hurled the 3-shoe staff at the giant mech's face. The force of the throw punched through the bot's head and out the back, leaving it unrecognizable and out of commission. Its whole body began to emit small detonations as a result of its head being blown out. Both the examinees and the teachers watched in stunned silence. Their expressions were frozen with disbelief at your display of strength. You had put a hole through the mech as easily as moving a pencil through paper. At the same time, Izuku used One for All to punch and destroy the zero-pointer in his own battle center. The two of you drew attention by taking down the mechs and saving lives in the process. All Might grinned proudly at both of you, pleased at the candidate's power. Although your quirks were vastly different, you and Izuku shared one similarity: secrecy. Both of you knew that if the wrong people learned about your powers, the future of Japan and perhaps the entire world could be in danger. You both bore personal burdens. Still, one thing was clear: both of you had bright futures in hero work ahead of you. You bounced off the exploding mech and leaped back to land on the roof of the building where examinees were trapped. The mech collapsed with a great thud. Present Mike announced that there was only 1 minute left. You dashed down the fire escape behind the building and arrived at the front where debris still blocked the exits. Now that you had 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖌 level strength in that moment, moving the chunks of cement was much easier. You declared that the door was clear and began to ask if everyone was all right, but you were interrupted by the last person you had wanted to see. Mineta cried and thanked you for saving them, saying he had thought they were doomed. You glared at Mineta with disgust. You pushed down your disdain and asked with genuine concern if anyone else was with him and where they were. Mineta wiped his face clean and led you to an unconscious Monoma. Your eyes lit up. While Monoma was not your favorite person, you often enjoyed watching him, except when he provoked Class 1A. His quirk was similar to yours. The right side of his head showed signs of an impact, most likely from falling debris, but he was still breathing. The building looked like it was minutes from collapse. You prepared to use Quicksilver to transfer both Monoma and Mineta out of the building safely, but nothing happened. You worried that your time with Quicksilver's power had already run out. Present Mike declared that time was up as the alarm rang across the battle center and bits of the building began to cave in. Refusing to die there with Mineta, you told them to hold on and that you would get both of them out. Mineta protested that he would not be carried like a baby, but you ignored him. You grabbed his arm with one hand and hoisted Monoma onto your shoulder. Mineta dangled as you sprinted toward the exit free of debris. Even without additional strength, Mineta was light and easy to move against his will. Without struggle, you managed to save yourself, Monoma, and Mineta from being crushed by the crumbling building. Multiple examinees crowded around, some praising your strength and courage, others asking questions and marveling at how quickly you had taken down the robots. They celebrated and speculated that you would pass the exam. You set Mineta down roughly on the ground and called for medical assistance, insisting that someone call a nurse because Monoma needed help. Medical staff arrived quickly, took Monoma from your shoulders, and wheeled him away to the infirmary. You heard heavy breathing beside you and glanced at Mineta. He seemed distracted as the medical team attended to the injured. Irritated, you dug into your pocket and threw sand into his eyes. Mineta cried out and frantically tried to wipe his eyes clean. He demanded to know what that was for. You apologized insincerely and tossed more sand toward his face, then smirked at his distressed expression. Then you strolled past his quivering body and toward the infirmary where you knew Izuku and Monoma would be resting. You tried your best to ignore the whispers and the gawking eyes staring at you. You also took care to avoid debris on the floor because you had sacrificed your sports shoes to perform your 3-shoe beating attack and were now walking barefoot. You thought to yourself that you would have to buy new shoes. When you arrived at the infirmary, you felt relieved to find Izuku sleeping. His arm and legs looked battered, but what mattered was that he had sacrificed himself to save Uraraka and would now be able to enroll in the school of his dreams because of his selflessness. You winced as your feet touched the cold tiles and sat on the chair beside his bed. You glanced at his face for a long moment. The left cheek where Uraraka had slapped him was covered with a bandage, but otherwise his freckled face was unmarked. You silently told him that whatever he believed about failing was wrong this time, that you would both be enrolling in UA together, and that you would do your best to save everyone, him included. You gently clasped his casted arm. Shoji appeared across the room, and you felt a pleasant surprise at seeing him. He had become one of your instant favorites. His quiet presence, character design, and gentle manner had drawn you in. Although he had not had much screen time in the anime and manga, you treasured every minute he was on display, and his backstory had only deepened your admiration. You resented how little attention he received and wished for more of his moments to be shown. Shoji asked if he was your friend. You explained that he was your best friend but that the examiners had split you up so you could not work together. You added that you had heard he had done well on his own, taking down a 0-pointer by himself, and you admitted you were proud of him. You asked Shoji what he was in the infirmary for and whether he was feeling better. Shoji blinked. He was not used to being treated without fear because of his heteromorph form. He explained that one of his arms had been damaged while fighting a 3-pointer, that Recovery Girl had healed his wounds, and that he was just resting. You offered a thumbs up and said you were glad to hear it. Then, feeling a little shy, you told him that he looked really cool and that his quirk was impressive. You hoped you were giving a good first impression. Shoji blinked and, unseen beneath his mask, smiled. He thanked you and said that you were kind. You thought of him as a gentle giant and felt a small pang in your chest. Monoma then pulled back the cubicle curtain that divided Izuku's bed from yours and remarked that they were more than just kind. They had saved his life. You gasped at the sudden movement and then let out a relieved laugh when Monoma smiled and explained that the nurse had told him you had saved both him and the other student from the collapsing building and that you had taken down a 0-pointer by yourself. He said he was forever grateful. You laughed and said you were glad he was okay. Shoji added that the freckled boy had also taken down a 0-pointer and that the two of you must be incredibly strong. You accepted the praise with a composed, flattered expression while secretly feeling ecstatic. You were actually talking to two side characters you admired. Shoji asked how you had taken down the robot in the first place. In response, you showed your bare feet and explained that you had taken it down with a 3-shoe beating, surprising them both. Monoma looked skeptical and said he doubted that was all you had done. You admitted that you had used some super strength as well and then emphasized that what mattered was that they were safe. You said you did not know what the future would bring, but that even if you did not pass, you would be happy knowing you had helped someone in need. Secretly you felt certain you would pass and join Class 1A. You joked inwardly about making UA admit its mistake if you didn't. Monoma teased that you definitely had a martyr complex. You joked back that he should be quiet or you would finish the building's job, and the two of you burst into laughter so hard you nearly toppled from your chairs. Monoma did not know many things about you beyond your power, but he was starting to like you. You were not easily offended like many others your age. Monoma thought your quirk was peculiar and intriguing. From the nurse's gossip he had heard that you had destroyed almost half of the 2-pointers, saved countless examinees, and taken down the mech. He suspected your quirk involved speed and strength and wanted to learn more. Shoji watched your interaction with a small, unfamiliar annoyance. He did not know why, but he did not enjoy feeling left out, a surprising reaction given how often he had grown used to being excluded because of his quirk. But for some reason, Shoji did not want the narrator's eyes off him. The narrator's eyes widened at the realization of being rude. They introduced themselves as full name, and asked for the others' names. When Shoji and Monoma gave their full names, the narrator beamed and offered to exchange numbers, promising to treat them to lunch once they had fully healed and wanting to get to know them better. Monoma and Shoji accepted and each gave their respective numbers. The narrator could not stop grinning when the two new contacts appeared in the phone. While the narrator continued happily conversing with the two visitors, they were unaware that Izuku had stopped breathing slowly and had been fully awake since the narrator sat beside him. Izuku's instincts had led him back into consciousness the moment he realized the narrator was near, and he did not expect them to be making friends so quickly. Izuku had always known that the narrator was kind and generous too of the many things he admired about them. Hearing the narrator enjoy someone else's company carved a bitter sting of jealousy into him. His hand clenched as the narrator focused their attention on Monoma and Shoji instead of him, their injured close friend. He recognized the feeling as selfish and knew the narrator likely only saw the newcomers as companions, but he could not help himself. For a moment he wished circumstances were different and that the two new visitors did not exist. Once 3 friends had fully healed, the narrator fulfilled their promise and treated Monoma and Shoji to their favorite meals at a nearby cafe. The narrator cracked jokes, made conversation, and was unusually social, finding it easier to talk with these characters than with unfamiliar people in real life. Izuku was uncharacteristically quiet. He only contributed when the narrator directed questions to him, otherwise sitting and listening attentively. Monoma and Shoji soaked up the narrator's attention eagerly. They traded light personal facts and the narrator answered Monoma's question about their quirk. Monoma asked if he could copy it, an innocent request that nevertheless surprised the narrator and caused them to cough on their drink. The narrator smiled shakily and explained that they were not comfortable allowing someone they just met to copy their quirk. Monoma pouted in playful disappointment, and Shoji spoke up firmly that if the narrator did not want their quirk copied, they should be left be. Monoma let out an amused laugh and surrendered the point, promising to wait until the narrator felt ready and inviting them to call whenever they wanted. He ended the promise with a playful wink toward the narrator, which sent a pleasant chill down the narrator's spine. Hearing their own names spoken by these characters felt different from daydreams and fanfiction. It was unexpectedly real. After paying for lunch, the narrator said goodbye to Monoma and Shoji, clasping both of their hands and shaking them at once with a bright grin. The narrator told them they had had a lot of fun and urged them to text their test results from UA as soon as possible. Shoji nodded silently, and Monoma verbally promised to share the details. The two characters tried to ignore the lingering warmth from the handshake and parted ways. The narrator and Izuku took the same train back home. The ride was as stiff as Izuku's contributions to the cafe conversation. The narrator shared one earbud with Izuku and played the playlist they had put together. The soothing vibration of the train and the familiar music caused Izuku's eyes to slowly close. For the first time that day, his face brightened as he rested his head against the narrator's shoulder and drifted off again. The narrator's gaze softened and they unconsciously brushed their hand through Izuku's green hair in the way he liked. A woman sitting nearby remarked that the two of them made a cute couple. The narrator chuckled and told her quietly that they heard that a lot but that they were just best friends. The repeated thought of best friends echoed in Izuku's mind and left an uncomfortable sting, yet he told himself he should not be greedy. For now, this small, NTMT moment together was enough. The affection from the narrator was something he treasured, and he wished they could stay like that a while longer. The last week stretched slowly. The narrator had trouble sleeping from anxiety about their UA enrollment letter. Katsuki had once more drifted away. Interactions with Monoma and Shoji remained fun, and playing video games with Shigaraki and Iguchi was a welcome distraction. The only person acting differently was Izuku. The narrator excused his distant behavior by assuming he still felt he had failed the exam, though a small part of them suspected his change in mood had to do with the new friends. It was night when Minato brought the narrator their test results from UA. She had never looked so proud, yet so nervous. You guessed a small part of her did not want them to accept you. You were not upset. You knew it was because she cared. She waited outside your bedroom as you ripped the letter in two. A small circle projection dropped onto your desk and activated a hologram of All Might. He explained what you already knew. You had passed the written test by one question, earned 78 combat points and 42 rescue points in the practical exam, for a total of 120 points. All Might announced it was a new record and congratulated you for passing. A sob escaped as your eyes glistened. This was it, this was real. You were going to ride the dangerous roller coaster that was the path ahead. From the moment you manifested this overpowered quirk, you had suspected you would ace the exam and enroll in UA. Now that it was happening, you told yourself you could not mess around too much anymore. You had to try. Even if you could not give everything, you still wanted to save and protect citizens, friends, and loved ones, including those labeled villains. When you told Minato the news, she cheered loudly and her eyes filled with tears. She hugged you tightly, brushed your face gently, and told you she was proud and would write to your parents. Your expression dropped at the mention of your parents. You had honestly forgotten about them. Would they even care? You pushed down the bitterness and offered a small smile when Minato faced you again. She said she would make your favorite meals to celebrate tomorrow and then disappeared into her room to write the letter. You entered your bedroom and shut the door softly. You told yourself not to focus on that now. You had to tell others about your enrollment. After you texted Monoma, shoji, and 𝖎�わ𝖡 the news, they replied with a barrage of messages congratulating you and sharing their own successes. You squealed happily and hopped into bed, raised your hands to the ceiling, and whispered thanks to whatever deity might be listening for this second chance. The moment was interrupted when your phone vibrated. The contact name made your eyes go round. It was Katsuki. This had been inevitable after you had scored higher than him. He had hyped himself up and had a naturally powerful quirk. Only placing second must have bruised his pride. You took a deep breath and answered the call, teasingly asking what the loser had to say. Katsuki erupted, screaming angrily and demanding to know what you had done. His voice was so loud you were sure Minato had heard it from across the house. You stayed composed despite the confrontation. His tone was fierce and volcanic. You told him his temper tantrum was mentally and physically draining, and that it was finally your turn to speak. You explained that neither you nor Izuku had met with any secret society to cheat the exam. You both had fought and disabled some robots and rescued people during the practical portion, nothing more. You reminded him that the world did not revolve around him and that neither you nor Izuku would stoop to cheating. You insisted that you both passed fairly. The call ended with tension still unresolved. It was clear the conversation would not finish peacefully. You snapped at Katsuki, telling him that if he had a problem with your enrollment he should take it up with the UA principal and leave you both alone. For a solid minute Katsuki was stunned and the atmosphere around them tightened. The spiky blonde's eyes widened as he processed the implication that you and Izuku had beaten him. He thought in disbelief that Deku would remain a rival for the next 4 years and cursed his luck, wishing Deku would stop getting in the way. You asked Katsuki if he was still there, concern showing in your voice. Katsuki smirked inwardly, amused that even after you had grilled him he remained worried. You sighed and explained that it was difficult to accept, but you had beaten him and planned to enroll at UA. Izuku would too, and there was nothing Katsuki could do about that. You told him that if he wanted to, he could keep training until he felt strong enough to beat you. You believed in him and always would. Katsuki dismissed part of that as nonsense. He knew full well that with a quirk like yours he could only dream of beating you in a fair fight unless you let him. Still, his fingers pinched the bridge of his nose as he tried to steady his racing heart. He had long tried to convince himself and everyone else that he had no weaknesses, but that belief faltered now. He realized his primary weakness was you, and he could not imagine losing you to anyone, Izuku included. From the moment he had seen you, he had felt that you belonged in his life. He scowled, muttering that it was infuriating that it had to be you. You responded with surprise. Katsuki snapped at first and then, in an unexpectedly gentle tone, asked if you would say again that you believed in him. Your eyes widened and then softened. You repeated that you believed in him, always. Katsuki felt the corners of his mouth lift into a small, reluctant grin, and he held your words in his mind like a promise. He resolved to use them as motivation to become stronger. He promised himself he would work to be better for you. You began to say goodnight, but Katsuki abruptly ended the call. You groaned and wondered when he would let you through all his layers. You did not know that if you could read his mind your perception of him might change, but in that moment none of that mattered. You were too excited about finally meeting your favorite heroes. You kicked your legs and squealed that it was the greatest day of your life. Meanwhile, the judges observing the examinees were discussing the results. One teacher noted that the top-ranked student had taken down the most faux villains in record time, had saved many peers, and had destroyed a huge mech in a single blow. That student would surely attract a lot of attention over the next 4 years. Another teacher pointed out that the second-place student had been close but had not earned any rescue points. A third teacher remarked that the second-place student had handled the smaller targets with focused counterattacks and had been impressively tough. On the other hand, the 8th-place student had earned no villain points, and one of the teachers observed that a couple of students had managed to destroy the giant robot before, though it had been a while since anyone had done it with a single attack. A different teacher warned that the powerful performance had seemed to come at a cost. The student appeared to have strained their body, as if they were not yet accustomed to their quirk. Watching the footage of your run through the course, he also admitted feeling that there was something off about you with a quirk so strong you might have been recommended for placement rather than participating, and your carefree attitude suggested you might be holding back. One of the female teachers chuckled and suggested he sounded jealous, but he denied it and repeated that while you were undeniably strong, that casual attitude might become your weakness. In a far corner of the room, the sleep-deprived hero who had been following the proceedings listened to the conversation and focused on the reports for you and Izuku. He noted that both of you would be assigned to his homeroom and realized he had a lot of work ahead of him. It would be troublesome. It was a beautiful morning. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and you and your best friend were on your way to the high school of your dreams. Minato insisted on feeding the protagonist a favorite breakfast and then enveloped them in her famously tight bear hug. The embrace was warm and overwhelming, and the protagonist protested that they would never make it to school if Minato crushed them. Minato laughed at the suffocated expression, apologized, and released the hug before anything dramatic happened. She then handed over a light blue cardboard box of macarons she had woken up early to make for the classmates, all tied with a navy blue bow. Minato asked with a worried expression whether it was 43 people to make sure she had made enough. The protagonist nodded. The acceptance rate that year had been tiny, 1 in 300. 5 students had been admitted through recommendations and 37 through the regular exams. Only a few familiar names had gotten in through recommendations, leaving a lingering question about who the other recommended student might be. The protagonist reminded themselves that 5 people enrolled through recommendations and that classmates had been split into 2 classes of 21. They felt fortunate to be in Class 1A and resented the usual rivalry from Class 1B, who felt destined to hate them. The protagonist craved action and excitement, so it was a relief to find that their teacher would be Aizawa, who would be guiding the class. The protagonist had asked Minato to make enough macarons for both Class 1A and Class 1B, plus 2 extras for Aizawa and Vlad King, hoping a small gesture might ease any future tension between the classes. They recognized how serious it was for Minato to part with her favorite pastry and knew she would notice if anyone took more than their share. The protagonist praised Minato warmly and thanked her for working so hard. Minato tried to act modest but was clearly proud, and she said she was happy to support a future hero. The protagonist murmured their gratitude, feeling the sting of tears at Minato's steady presence since their reincarnation into this world. Their so-called parents had not reached out, and Minato had become more of a parental figure than either of them. Minato ruffled the protagonist's hair with a sad smile, told them it was always a pleasure, and urged them to wipe their eyes, put on their shoes, and go start the day. The protagonist nodded and opened the door to their new life. Outside, Izuku gaped at a massive door, emerald eyes wide with awe. The protagonist remarked that the place was huge and joked about giants, adding that Shoji was built like a tank and might well fit the idea. Izuku's expression darkened briefly at the mention of Shoji before he quickly masked it. He wondered aloud whether Shoji and Monoma would be there, hoping they might not be. The protagonist shrugged and played ignorant, saying they would be happy for them either way. They took hold of the box of Minato's macarons, crumpled the plastic bag, and tucked it into the backpack pocket. They explained that they planned to stop by Class 1B to share the macarons and congratulate the students who had passed, and that Izuku could go on ahead if he wanted. Before they could turn away, Izuku grabbed their arm, panic in his eyes, and reminded them that they had agreed to stick together for the day. The protagonist remembered how, at the amusement park, Izuku had begged to stay near them on the Ferris wheel. A private, insecure part of the protagonist enjoyed the attention, but they knew the attachment was rooted in Izuku's long experience of isolation as someone without a quirk. They could not blame him entirely, people had avoided him, and he had little experience making other friends. The protagonist believed that would change now that he was among kinder, more outgoing classmates who treated him as an equal. Feeling Izuku's grip tighten, the protagonist set the box on the ground and gently placed a hand on his. They reassured him that he would not be alone, that beyond the door were many future heroes he would work with and who would be supportive, and that having other allies and friends would be a good thing. Izuku looked down, chewing his lip as he considered the words, and gradually relaxed his hold until he let go. Your eyes widened when Izuku wrapped his arms around you. He hugged you tightly and quietly asked you to promise to come back. You blushed and laughed awkwardly, promising to be back in a few minutes and reminding him to let you go because Minato had nearly squished you that morning. After Izuku reluctantly agreed and released you, the two of you stood in front of your respective classrooms and opened the doors at the same time. You stepped into your room without trouble, while Izuku lingered outside for a moment, watching you go inside with longing in his eyes. He did not want anyone else but you. As soon as you stepped into Class 1B, all eyes turned to you. A drop of sweat traced your temple as you cleared your throat and gave your name. Monoma greeted you with a surprised smile and asked why you were visiting, guessing that you were from Class 1A. You waved cheerfully and confirmed that you were. You had told Monoma and Shoji to keep their class assignments secret to surprise you, and though you already knew which class they would be in, you feigned surprise. The whole class erupted in chatter and stared at you. Kendo reacted with astonishment at recognizing you. You asked why everyone was so shocked and reached to touch your face out of insecurity. Kendo hastily denied that anything was on your face and explained that they were surprised that the person who had saved a classmate and taken down the giant robot looked like you. Pony added with an innocent grin that she had expected someone bigger and scarier. You deadpanned at their comments, each remark pricking your self-esteem, and masked your disappointment with an amused laugh. Vlad King crossed his arms and asked why you, who belonged in Class 1A, were visiting 1B. You remembered your reason and your promise to Izuku to be quick. You explained that you had brought macarons your nanny had made to share with both Class 1A and 1B as a congratulations gift for passing the exam and enrolling in UA. You offered a light blue box of raspberry macarons and asked everyone to take only one, even handing one to Vlad King. The class brightened at the mention of macarons and rose to try them. Among them, you noticed a student you had never seen before in the manga or anime. She had red-pink hair tied into bubble-braided pigtails with yellow star pins by her bangs, light gray almond-shaped eyes, a small mole beneath her left eye, a squared jaw, and stood an inch taller than Monoma. You swallowed and anxiously watched as she and the rest of the class bit into the treats. They all reacted with approval. Tetsu praised the macarons enthusiastically while trying not to mess his mouth. Yanagi, whose expression normally stayed flat, admitted plainly that they were really good and her eyes shone with delight. The new girl finished her macaron, wiped a crumb from her cheek, and said the macarons were delicious, asking you to thank your nanny on their behalf. You breathed a relieved sigh you had not realized you were holding and respectfully told her you would. You asked for her name. The girl raised a brow in mild suspicion before introducing herself as Toshiko Hamada and offering her hand. You shook it happily. Vlad King then reminded you that classes were starting and gently nudged you back toward the exit. Monoma called for you to return and you waved goodbye as Class 1B bid you farewell. It was time to meet your classmates in Class 1A. Nervousness made you tap your fingers on the box. You felt like your heart might skip a beat. You reminded yourself that you had already faced villains, survived a harrowing encounter with the sludge villain, taken down a towering robot, and helped save key characters. You told yourself you could do this. You summoned your courage, slammed the door open with dramatic flair, and strode in with arms wide and a determined expression. Your classmates fell silent and stared at you in confusion. Your bravado deflated into an awkward laugh as you introduced yourself as full name, and mentioned your close friendship with Izuku. Izuku looked shy and rubbed the back of his head as attention turned to him. Tenya Ida explained that they had been just talking about you and introduced himself from semi-private academy. Achiko Uraraka expressed cheerfully that she recognized you from before the exams and thought you were very cool for taking down a giant robot. You thanked Uraraka and noted that Izuku had been busy making many new friends. You then offered macarons to everyone. Upon revealing the contents, almost the entire class crowded around to take one, except for a certain blonde hothead and a boy with two-toned hair who hung back. Just like the previous class, everyone praised and thanked the protagonist for the macarons. The protagonist gave all the credit to Minato. Ashido praised the protagonist's nanny as a serious master baker and asked, with a stuffed smile, if he could commission her to bake a cake. The protagonist replied that they would ask her later that day and let him know tomorrow. The protagonist was in such a good mood that they did not glare at Mineta when he reached for a macaron. Mineta seemed tense around the protagonist, probably because the protagonist had thrown pocket sand at him twice. Then Shoji finally made himself known. Shoji greeted the protagonist and said he was happy to see them again, his voice a bit muffled because he used his real mouth instead of his tentacles. The protagonist gasped and greeted Shoji warmly, wrapping an arm around his waist in a side hug. The hug was awkward because the protagonist could not fully embrace him without dropping the macarons. Shoji stuttered that he was fine and thanked them for asking. He was not used to physical affection and his cheeks flushed beneath his mask. Ever since childhood, physical touch had been one of the protagonist's love languages, which explained why people had assumed they and Izuku had been dating for years. It was simply how the protagonist showed care. Izuku watched the scene with thin lips and distant eyes. The protagonist offered a macaron to Shoji. Shoji accepted, and the protagonist pumped their fists in the air in victory when Shoji said they were good. Shoji chuckled quietly at the reaction, finding it cute. As everyone returned to their seats, the protagonist stepped toward Katsuki, who had been watching intently. He loathed the protagonist's comfortable interaction with Shoji, just as Izuku did. Before the three of them entered UA, Katsuki had surprisingly not confronted Izuku about how he had passed the exam. The protagonist guessed that after Katsuki had let out his frustrations earlier, he had listened to the protagonist's advice and left them and Izuku alone at least for now. The protagonist offered Katsuki a macaron. Katsuki declined, saying he would pass and that he was not a fan of sweets. The protagonist countered by reminding him of a time when he had eaten 3 scoops of ice cream as a child. Katsuki scowled, his cheeks flushing in embarrassment, and snapped that it was a long time ago and that he did not need nagging from someone he considered an extra. The protagonist teased that being an extra was cold and that the tsundere act would not help him attract anyone. Katsuki demanded who even suggested he wanted someone like that. The protagonist admitted that Katsuki wanted someone, but noted he would never call the protagonist that. Katsuki was too proud to admit anything. The protagonist conceded the point but added that if he did want someone, his awful attitude would have to change. Katsuki replied roughly for the protagonist to get lost. The protagonist then suggested, with a teasing grin, that he should take them on a date first. Katsuki's blush deepened. He yelled for the protagonist to shut up and, lowering his voice, told them to keep that inappropriate stuff to themselves. The protagonist winked and said they could not resist when an opportunity opened. The protagonist could be more shameless than Katsuki at times, and it always made his heart race. The protagonist sighed, took a tissue from their pocket, wrapped a macaron in it, and placed it on Katsuki's desk. Katsuki brusquely insisted that he did not want the protagonist's macarons. The protagonist asked him to accept it as a peace offering, explaining that they were in high school now and did not want him to start anything with Izuku. They urged him to stop the petty rivalry and try to start fresh, asking him to think about it. Katsuki glanced at the wrapped macaron, then used his quirk to burn it and tossed what remained into the nearest trash can. The entire classroom gasped. Ishido demanded what was wrong and why he had done that. Kirishima defended the protagonist, pointing out that they had personally brought the macarons for everyone and that it was wrong to treat them like trash. The protagonist stood stunned, gaping at the trash can where their macaron had been discarded. They should have expected this. Katsuki had not fully matured yet. Still, the cruel act stung. The support from classmates eased the hurt slightly, but it did not erase the feeling of disrespect. Ida intervened, chopping the air with an authoritative gesture and demanding that Katsuki apologize to the protagonist at once or he would report the incident to the homeroom teacher. The protagonist asked Ida not to report him, saying Katsuki was not worth it. They admitted that Katsuki had a point. They were all here to be heroes and they were all rivals. Ida looked concerned and confused, noting that Katsuki had insulted the protagonist. The protagonist explained that it was nothing new. They had hoped Katsuki would grow up once enrolled at UA, but he remained a bully. Their plan to get back at a bully was through success, and with that thought, the protagonist turned to face Katsuki again. This time, your expression hardened and your glare was harsh. You scowled and vowed that you would beat him and become the #1 hero. It was not just a promise but a statement, a fact. The class held their breath as you and Katsuki stared each other down, never once breaking eye contact. Electricity seemed to crackle between you two in a battle for dominance. In that moment everyone saw the hidden edge in you that had scored so highly on the exams. They took your warning that you were their rival seriously, though they could not tell if any of them could ever surpass you. Katsuki had realized it too. He did not let his unease show, whether it was fear, thrill, or excitement. He would finally see if you were as powerful as people had claimed. A sudden deep voice came from behind the entrance. A man was resting on the floor with a yellow sleeping bag wrapped around him. Your face brightened as you realized you were face to face with one of your favorite pro-heroes, the tired-looking 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖡. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 introduced himself in a flat tone and noted that it had taken only 8 seconds for the class to fall silent, which he found unacceptable because time was precious. He rose from the ground and freed himself from his cocoon-like sleeping bag. While the others stared at 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 with confusion, you bounced on your spot and hurried over to him. You greeted 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 enthusiastically and offered him a box of macarons. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖆's eyes widened briefly as he asked if you had made one for him too. You explained that you had, and that you had arranged for more for Class 1B and their teacher as well, then corrected yourself and respectfully called him sir. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 chuckled at your embarrassed expression, took a macaron and ate it. He thanked you, commented that they were good, and introduced himself as Shota 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎, your teacher. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 then instructed everyone to put on the gear they had been given and head outside. The class followed his orders, leaving the room except for you and Izuku. You stayed behind to put away your heavy backpack and to think about the single macaron left in the box. It had been intended for Todoroki, but you had hesitated to give it to him for fear of being embarrassed. Besides, Todoroki was different. Once he set his mind on something, nothing seemed to deter him. Izuku asked if you had had a macaron yet. You shook your head and explained that you had asked Minato to make 43, 41 for both classes, then 2 for Vlad King and Mr. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎. Everyone except Todoroki had taken one. Izuku began to offer the macaron to you when a cool voice interrupted. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 said that he believed the macaron was meant for him and apologized for not taking it earlier because it had been crowded. Your eyebrows rose when Todoroki entered the classroom. You told yourself to stay calm. You greeted him a little too enthusiastically, which made Izuku stare in surprise. You coughed into your arm, apologized, and pushed the box toward him. When Todoroki took the macaron, he split it in half and offered one piece to you. You placed the box on your desk and watched Todoroki's hand. Izuku's eyes darted between the macaron and your face, a mix of disbelief and discomfort pulling at him. Inside, he silently pleaded for the moment to pass. Todoroki, in a straightforward tone, said he had heard you did not have a macaron today and insisted that you take the piece. You accepted gratefully, your fingers brushed briefly, an ordinary contact that still registered to Izuku as significant. You tasted the sweet, delicate pastry and lit up with surprise at how good it was. Todoroki's expression softened very slightly at the sight. Todoroki said he would see you outside and left the room quickly. You felt your heart skip a beat at the quiet interaction and muttered a little catchphrase under your breath. Startled, you realized Izuku had been standing nearby the whole time. You suggested that the two of you go and not keep the others waiting, taking his hand and leading him out. Izuku found himself preoccupied with the memory of you surrounded by other classmates. Shoji, possibly Minoma, Katsuki, and now Todoroki. You seemed to attract attention wherever you went, and he resented that you were not only with him. He wished you would notice that he was there too. Class 1A then reacted in unison when 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 announced a Quirk assessment test. Uraraka protested that they would miss orientation, but 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 replied nonchalantly that if they wanted to make the big leagues, they could not waste time on pointless ceremonies. The entire class was surprised by his practical stance. You watched him with quiet admiration as he continued, explaining that at UA they were not tethered to traditions. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 explained that he would run the class as he saw fit and reminded them they had been taking standardized tests for most of their lives. He said they had never used their quirks in physical exams before and that the country still pretended everyone was created equal by not allowing the most powerful to excel. He added that the situation was not rational and that one day the Ministry of Education would have to learn. 𝖎𝖌𝖆𝖌𝖎 then turned to the protagonist and asked about the farthest distance the protagonist had thrown a softball in junior high. All eyes turned to the protagonist. Katsuki scoffed quietly at the mention of the protagonist scoring the highest on the entrance exam. The protagonist frowned, trying to remember, and then looked at Izuku with a shy grin, apologetically admitting they did not remember. 𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎 sighed and told the protagonist to try doing it with their quirk. The classmates immediately took notice. Up to that point the protagonist had not appeared flashy and had avoided showing their quirk when asked. Now they would see why the protagonist had scored so high. The protagonist obediently stood in the center of the circle with a softball in hand. 𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎 bluntly instructed everyone that anything went as long as the participants stayed in the circle and that they were wasting time. The protagonist stretched arms and legs, took a deep breath, and closed their eyes. They considered borrowing a super strength ability that would have sent the ball around the earth in seconds, but rejected it because it would cause massive destruction at ground level. Instead they chose to use Quicksilver and activated it. Everything around the protagonist seemed to freeze. They assumed a pitcher's stance and, using their dominant arm, threw the ball as softly as they could. The highest recorded pitching speed in their world was 79.4 miles per hour, so even a restrained throw at Quicksilver velocity would far exceed normal performance. To avoid too much attention, the protagonist intentionally held back. A powerful gust of wind hit everyone in the face as the softball vanished from the protagonist's hand and streaked away at incredible speed. The ball traveled far beyond the horizon into the forest beside the pea grounds, striking trees along the way until something solid finally stopped it. Classmates and 𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎 were stunned by the speed of the throw. When 𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎 checked the distance, his eyes widened in disbelief and he silently showed the class the score. The recorded distance was 32,186.9 meters, roughly 20 miles. The classmates reacted with astonishment. The distance exceeded Katsuki's score and likely outdistanced the whole class combined, though it was still far from some extreme records. Kaminari reacted in shocked disbelief, struggling to comprehend how they could ever beat that. 𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎 recovered his composure and stressed that everyone needed to learn their maximum capabilities, as it was the most rational way to assess their potential as pro-heroes. The protagonists thought to themselves that the displayed performance was not even their maximum and that their power could be frightening at times. They nervously fidgeted with the edge of their sports uniform while trying to avoid a certain pair of crimson eyes. 𝖎𝖌𝖎 acknowledged that she could not even see the protagonist's arm move because they had been so fast, and others agreed, staring in awe. Katsuki and Todoroki remained shell-shocked, Katsuki especially intimidated by the throw. Katsuki had spent his life trying to convince himself he was better than the protagonist, clinging to the belief that the protagonist might one day choose him over Izuku. He realized, painfully, that the protagonist had been toying with him. He had been made to believe he had a chance when reality made that unlikely. The memory of the day Katsuki had accidentally burned some followers resurfaced. On that occasion the protagonist had used only a fraction of their power to affect Katsuki's body. The protagonist could have subdued him completely, and he had been powerless to resist. Katsuki wore a haunted expression as his heart pounded and his palms shook while he glanced in the protagonist's direction. He felt increasingly certain that the protagonist had told Izuku the full extent of their quirk. Silent rage and hurt built in him as he wanted nothing more than to demand an explanation and to be seen by the protagonist, but shock kept him rooted in place. He could only wait as he always had. Meanwhile, the protagonist had never wanted to disappear more than in that moment. They knew Katsuki was staring and had a sense of what was going through his mind. A short, neutral pause followed as everyone processed the implications of the throw and the tensions it revealed. You couldn't help but feel guilty that Katsuki had to find out this way. You wished you could tell him the truth about what your quirk actually was, but you did not want him to get hurt or worse because of you. Katsuki could not comprehend just how much you cared for him and his well-being. While everyone else excitedly chatted about using their quirks in the assessment test, 𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎 ruined the mood with his usual bluntness. He announced that the entire class would compete in 8 physical tests to gauge their potential, and that whoever came in last would be expelled immediately. Everyone was rightfully startled and confused by 𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎's harsh tactics. You pretended to be surprised, but in reality you imagined 𝖒𝖆𝖌𝖎 in a wedding dress. You glanced at your broccoli-haired best friend, who looked terrified. You could not blame him. Izuku had no control over his quirk yet and could only use it at full force or not at all. Uraraka tried to protest that it was not fair to send someone home after they had just arrived at UA, but she was immediately shut down when Aizawa argued that the world was full of unfairness and that it was a hero's job to try to combat that unfairness. Sensing Izuku's anxiety, you placed your palm on his shoulder and offered him a comforting smile, telling him that he had this. Izuku hummed in return, thanked you, and resolved together to do their best. A drop of sweat slid from your forehead as you reminded yourself that while you would do your best to pass, you were also going to do your best to hold back, which would be more difficult than you had expected. As expected by most, you excelled at the first 4 tests without much challenge. In the 50-meter dash, you crossed the finish line before the gunshot finished its single sound, beating Ida's time by 0.05 seconds. Ida looked downcast and disappointed in himself afterward. Ida acknowledged your victory with solemn humility, admitting that he still had a lot to grow and that, for the moment, you were far superior. You quickly shook your head and insisted that he was not inferior, praising him and saying that with enough training he would surpass you in no time. Ida's eyes widened, and he expressed how much your encouragement meant, promising to do his best. You cheered him on, telling him to continue believing in himself, and Ida reacted with astonishment and an embarrassed attempt to fix his glasses. Kaminari, watching your interaction with Ida from nearby, quietly told Kirishima and Siro that he was relieved you were not stuck up and that he was surprised your powerful quirk had not gone to your head. Kirishima muttered that it was impressive how you had kept your cool even after the blonde boy had ruined your macaron, praising you as very composed and manly while grinning fiercely. As All Might was about to announce the next training, Ida beat him to it by pointing out that the test was taking place in the fake city from the entrance exam and asked whether they would be conducting urban battles again. All Might explained with a broad smile that while many villain fights happened outside, statistically most of them took place indoors. The memory of the sludge villain nearly suffocating you made you cringe. You wanted nothing more than to take that villain down for harming you, Katsuki, and Izuku. All Might added that truly intelligent criminals stayed hidden in the shadows, mentioning larger threats as examples. All Might then explained the training exercise. The students would be split into teams of heroes and villains for 2-on-2 indoor battles. Realizing there were 21 students, he noted that one team would have 3 people and proposed choosing teams by drawing lots from a yellow box to make things as fair and unbiased as possible. He outlined the scenario. The villains had hidden a nuclear missile somewhere in their hideout. The heroes would win by capturing the villains or recovering the weapon, while the villains would win by protecting it. When the time came to draw lots, your heart raced as you wondered which team you would be on and whether you would be paired with familiar classmates. You were relieved and a little suspicious when you were not paired with Izuku. Instead, you were grateful to be teamed with someone you knew, preferring that over being paired with Katsuki or Mineta. You noted privately that, even if it was awkward, at least it could have been worse. In a surprising turn, Uraraka ended up as the 3rd member of Team B, specifically on Todoroki's team. Uraraka voiced her disappointment that you, Izuku, and she would not all be together. You patted her back and offered support, telling her not to worry and that there would always be a next time, and you admitted you had a feeling her team might do well. Uraraka laughed at your remark and seemed amused. The protagonist noted that someone was not taking the situation seriously and thought that was probably for the best. Uraraka thanked the protagonist for their optimism. As All Might rummaged through 2 boxes labeled villain and hero, the protagonist's arm slipped over Uraraka's shoulder and tightened slightly while they all waited for the team selections. Uraraka's eyes widened and her face flushed. She tried to remain calm while her heart raced, silently urging herself to stay composed. The heroes were paired against Katsuki's villains, and All Might directed the rest of the class to the monitoring room to watch the match. As everyone began to leave, Shoji called out good luck to the protagonist and offered encouragement. The protagonist was surprised by Shoji's supportive words and smiled in thanks. Shoji hummed in response, glanced at the arm around Uraraka's shoulder, narrowed his eyes briefly without comment, and left. Others noticed as well. Izuku's emerald gaze went dull, one of Katsuki's eyes twitched in irritation, and Ida struggled quietly with an unexpected, awkward urge to reciprocate the closeness. Ida reminded himself that they had only just met and that he should behave properly, but he still felt discomfited by his own feelings. The protagonist was largely unaware of the attention. 𝖎𝖑𝖌, sensing the tension and needing to rejoin the others, cleared her throat and told the protagonist she had to go but that their arm was preventing her from moving. The protagonist instantly retracted the arm, cheeks warming with embarrassment, and apologized repeatedly, explaining that they sometimes hugged people without thinking and asking for forgiveness while bowing in earnest and calling her an affectionate nickname. 𝖎𝖑𝖌 laughed softly at the overblown apology, admitted there was no need to be so sorry, and said it was fine. She then wished the protagonist and 𝖎𝖑𝖶 good luck before walking off to join the others. Once out of sight, 𝖎𝖑𝖌 placed her hand on the shoulder where the arm had been and smiled contentedly, thinking the protagonist was sweet. The protagonist sighed in relief and resolved to be more mindful of public displays of affection, half joking about missing human contact. 𝖎𝖑𝖶 snapped out of his daze and tried to prepare words of reassurance, but he faltered when he felt Katsuki's glare. 𝖎𝖑𝖶 looked down, struggling to steady himself, then remembered why he was standing there: to be a hero and to protect what mattered to him. He would not lose the protagonist to anyone. He gathered his courage, clenched his fist, and met Katsuki's stare without backing down. Katsuki blinked in disbelief at 𝖎𝖑𝖶's sudden bravery. The protagonist recalled telling Katsuki previously that 𝖎𝖑𝖶's attempt to save someone despite being powerless proved that he had the heart of a hero, and that Katsuki could not bully him into seeing things otherwise. That memory seemed to sharpen Katsuki's glare into a hotter, more focused hatred directed at 𝖎𝖑𝖶. The protagonist found the tension between 𝖎𝖑𝖶 and Katsuki strangely compelling, imagining the slow burn, enemies to lovers potential, unaware of how far from the truth that idea might be. As 𝖎𝖑𝖶 held his ground, both young men appeared utterly devoted to gaining even a moment of the protagonist's attention. In that instant, Katsuki realized that the protagonist was going to fight against him. He cursed under his breath as his headache worsened. 𝖎𝖌𝖆 then instructed the villains to go inside and get set up. 𝖎𝖌𝖆 announced that in 5 minutes the good guys would be let loose and the battle would start, but before Katsuki and Ida could enter the building, the protagonist called out to them. They turned their attention and waited for a response. The protagonist's mask displayed a cheerful expression, and the protagonist gave them a thumbs up while wishing that the best team win. Ida thanked the protagonist and respectfully wished them good luck. Katsuki barked that he planned to win, and the protagonist responded sarcastically that it was always a pleasure to talk with him. The villainous duo entered the building. 𝖎𝖌𝖆 handed the protagonist and 𝖎𝖑𝖶 a map of the enormous building, a radio earbud so the protagonist could talk to 𝖎𝖑𝖶, and a roll of capture tape. As 𝖎𝖌𝖆 prepared to leave, the protagonist stopped him and produced a small blue and red dotted box with a white bow, explaining that yesterday the protagonist had given macarons to both Class A and B and their teachers but had not had one for 𝖎𝖌𝖆, so the protagonist had bought a vanilla macaron before going to school and made sure it was freshly made. 𝖎𝖌𝖆's brows rose in surprise, his grin widened, and he accepted the box gratefully, thanking the protagonist and wishing them luck before departing while holding the box carefully. The protagonist adjusted the mask and watched him walk away. The protagonist sighed dreamily and joked that one day they would marry him and Mr. 𝖒𝖑𝖌. 𝖎𝖑𝖶 admonished the protagonist not to joke like that, and the protagonist declared defiantly that they never would, raising a fist. 𝖎𝖑𝖶 knew the protagonist was not being serious, but he still felt envious of his idol and resolved to work out harder. He made a mental note about training, then looked down at the paper in his hands. This was his chance to prove to the protagonist and everyone else that he was capable of being a hero. He refused to lose today. When 𝖎𝖌𝖆 announced that the indoor combat training had begun, the protagonist felt determination surge and a menacing grin crossed their mask. The protagonists told themselves to give it everything. Yu and 𝖎𝖑𝖶 silently slipped into the building through an open window. Yu muttered that the eagles had landed. 𝖎𝖑𝖶 cautioned that there were a lot of blind spots. Before he could take another step, Yu grasped his hand to stop him because you expected Katsuki to ambush the two of you and you would rather be the first target than 𝖎𝖑𝖶. You told him that it would be better for you to take the lead since he still had limited control over his quirk and that, if Katsuki or Ida attacked, you could make a quick escape for both of you. You believed this was the best strategy. Izuku refused the suggestion, explaining that the last time you had walked ahead he had been powerless to save you and that he wanted to protect you now. He asked you to stop treating him like a child and to stay behind him. Your eyes widened beneath your mask, and after a few seconds you reluctantly let go of his hand. You hid your anxiety behind the mask by putting on a confident expression. You acknowledged Izuku and told him to lead the way. You believed that even without using his quirk the two of you could win with your abilities alone, but you still worried about Izuku getting hurt by Katsuki. Izuku thanked you quietly and the two of you crept through the empty halls in tense silence. You considered finishing the situation quickly using Quicksilver to move the offending weapon out of the building or to restrain Katsuki and Ida, but those options felt too easy. You had a plan and decided to let things play out. You took a deep breath and activated Quicksilver. At the next turn in the hall, you placed your hand a few inches from Izuku's back in case Katsuki attacked. The countdown in your head reached 1 when Katsuki suddenly appeared between the halls and launched a large explosion aimed at Izuku. You pulled Izuku out of the path by his collar and used your forearm armor to shield his face from the blast. The explosion sent both of you tumbling to the ground with a grunt. You checked Izuku quickly, holding up 3 fingers to gauge his awareness as you scanned his face for injuries. Fortunately, his mask had not been ruined. Izuku confirmed that he was fine and praised your reflexes, then got to his feet and stared toward the dust cloud that hid Katsuki. Katsuki wiped the dust away with one hand, and the crater in the wall revealed the force of his attack. He taunted Deku and suggested that he was afraid to face him directly, implying that you might be left to fight. Izuku ignored the taunt and said he had expected Katsuki's surprise attack. You stood and made a disapproving face with your mask, teasing that Katsuki was getting into his role. Katsuki's eye twitched at the comment, followed by a manic grin, and then he sprinted toward Izuku. Katsuki warned that he would not hold back, and both he and Izuku knew that without rules or supervision Katsuki would try to beat Izuku badly. As Katsuki attempted a punch, Izuku countered by grabbing Katsuki's right arm, turning, and throwing him to the ground. Katsuki let out a sharp sound as his back hit the floor. You reacted with a loud exclamation, joking that Katsuki had been knocked out. A vein throbbed at Katsuki's temple as he grit his teeth and seethed at being made a fool of. Izuku, panting briefly while Katsuki slowly pushed himself up, explained that he had watched and analyzed Katsuki for years and knew his opening moves. He said he had studied every hero he admired and had kept notes on them. Katsuki's eyes narrowed as he processed that information, clearly on the verge of losing his composure. Izuku clenched his fists, moved into a fighting stance, and declared that he was no longer the helpless kid he had been. He said that Deku was now the name of a hero and that he would not lose to Katsuki again. The words were fierce and filled with courage. Katsuki's expression changed to one of scornful hatred. He understood the full meaning of Izuku's claim, and a shadow crossed his face as he forced himself to stand. He snarled the nickname at Izuku, and a flash of childhood memories returned, the day he had felt abandoned when you had sided with Izuku. In that memory, child Izuku had stepped forward with determination to stop Katsuki and child you had taken a protective position beside him. Back in the present, faced with a visibly trembling Izuku, Katsuki's lips twisted in anger and small sparks of his quirk began to flicker from his palms, signaling that the fight was about to escalate. Katsuki continued, accusing the other of wanting to fight him anyway. Memories crowded his mind. The protagonist and Izuku holding hands, laughing together, the protagonist's mischievous grin, anger, flustered looks, concerned eyes, sad smiles, words of encouragement, and the declaration to become the #1 hero. Those images repeated until Katsuki could only think of the protagonist. Katsuki murmured that they had been taken from him so quietly that neither the protagonist nor Izuku could hear, but Izuku read it clearly in his eyes. Katsuki wanted to make him pay. Then Katsuki shouted that he hated him, in a voice so loud that the protagonist had to cover her ears. Ida tried to call Katsuki for a status report, but Katsuki told him to be quiet and defend the weapon before ending the call. The protagonist thought they had only 13 minutes left. She noted that the situation had been entertaining and asked Izuku to move the quarrel elsewhere, teasingly. Izuku and Katsuki looked bewildered. Katsuki snapped angrily, demanding to know what she meant. Izuku questioned the idea of a lover's quarrel in surprise. The protagonist assured them that the others could not hear and said she thought they might have feelings for each other. She offered her support and apologized for not seeing the signs sooner. Both friends reacted with shock and denial. Izuku stammered, cheeks flushed, and Katsuki exploded in anger, insisting he was absolutely sure they did not have those feelings. The protagonist admitted she had made a bet and owed Minato money. Izuku reacted in disbelief. Both boys privately thought they had fallen for an idiot. The protagonist apologized again for missing the signs and said she would see them later. Katsuki suddenly lunged at her with a raised fist, intent on stopping her. Izuku called out in worry, but the protagonist calmly dodged and struck him, causing him to recoil against a wall. She had deliberately held back her strength to avoid lasting harm. With Katsuki momentarily down, the protagonist instructed Izuku to keep him occupied while she went after Ida. Katsuki recovered and propelled himself into the air with his quirk, aiming a kick at the protagonist, but Izuku blocked the strike with his forearm, mirroring the protection she had shown him earlier. Izuku urged the protagonist to go, and she used her speed to search every floor until she found where the weapon was hidden. Katsuki muttered in frustration. Katsuki realized he could not match her speed and that he needed to return to Ida to protect the weapon. He struck the wall behind Izuku with an explosive swing to force him back and create distance. Izuku understood that Katsuki was deliberately trying to put space between them so he could retreat and face the protagonist together with Ida. Determined not to let that happen, Izuku sprinted, targeted Katsuki's knees to trip him, and put him in a light chokehold to prevent him from moving. Katsuki gasped as he gripped Izuku's arm. Izuku declared that the fight was his and that he would not allow Katsuki to reach the others. Katsuki twisted, shoved Izuku away, and broke the hold. Izuku stumbled, steadied himself, and raised his guard. Katsuki's expression hardened as dark energy gathered in his palms, and he warned Izuku that if a fight was what he wanted, he would take it seriously and would not hold back. Finding the weapon was easy. Taking Ida's villain persona seriously was not. The protagonist did not bother to hide after discovering Ida, since there seemed little point. Ida was taken aback by the sudden appearance but quickly slipped back into his exaggerated evil facade. Ida hated being aligned with criminal behavior and hated that he had to fight the protagonist most of all, but he could not afford to lose this trail and bring shame on his family. He considered restraining the protagonist the safest tactic, planning to keep them upstairs while hoping Bakugo would defeat Midoriya, and he worried that the protagonist might resent him for it. Ida then launched into an over-the-top monologue in his strident, officious voice, explaining that he had predicted the protagonist's arrival and detailing how he'd used pillars and objects to hide the real weapon among replicas. He boasted that the setup would prevent the protagonist from searching and fighting at the same time, and he punctuated his declaration with an emphatic, theatrical laugh. The protagonist scanned the room and noticed that behind every pillar a barrier of boxes concealed something large. It was clever. Ida had used objects to mask the real weapon with decoys. Undeterred, the protagonist searched through the box barriers swiftly until the weapon was found and then returned to position, confident in their knowledge of its location. Amused beneath the mask, the protagonist decided to play along with Ida's performance until Katsuki activated his bracer and the timing to move came. They adopted a dramatic posture and feigned helplessness over the boxes, putting on an exaggerated expression to match the villain act. Ida cackled closer, fully committing to the role. Izuku contacted the protagonist and reported that the weapon had been located near the middle of the 5th floor, warned that Ida was deep into his villain arc, and asked for the protagonist's status. The protagonist informed Izuku that they had found the weapon and would disable Ida soon before assisting with Katsuki, then advised Izuku to stay safe and ended the call. Ida produced a roll of capture tape and, briefly dropping his facade, urged that things did not need to turn violent. He asked the protagonist to surrender, insisting it was impossible to find the weapon otherwise and promising not to hurt them. The protagonist responded with a saccharine, theatrical manner before shifting to a darker tone to declare that they were not there for the weapon but to stop him. The floor suddenly shook as Katsuki activated his bracer and released a massive explosion that destroyed a large portion of the building. Using the chaos as cover, the protagonist vanished from sight. Ida gasped and frantically searched the room, struggling to pinpoint the protagonist as the building buckled around them. In the confusion, the protagonist moved with calm efficiency. A swift, precise strike rendered Ida unconscious without graphic detail. The protagonist caught Ida and laid him gently on the floor, bound him with capture tape, dragged him to the hidden weapon, and then sprinted down toward the area that Katsuki had devastated. Hidden behind a cloud of dust, the protagonist closed in on Katsuki, keeping low and silent. The mask filtered the air, allowing them to maintain position without coughing. Katsuki, exhilarated by the power of his new gauntlets, boasted about the explosive force they could produce and taunted Deku to use his quirk, claiming Deku would never be able to beat him. Before anyone could respond, Katsuki suddenly slumped and fell unconscious to the rocky floor. The protagonist did not attempt to catch him, instead moving quickly to secure him. With practiced speed, the protagonist bound Katsuki and carried him up to the next floor to join Ida. They tied the two together and placed the weapon with them, securing the situation, then darted back to Izuku's location. Izuku scrambled to his feet, his face now fully exposed, and stammered that he could never get used to how fast the protagonist was and began to ask about Ida. The protagonist interrupted the ramble with a light pat on Izuku's head, flashed an energetic thumbs up, and confirmed that Ida had already been handled and that they had won. All Might then declared that the hero team had won. The heroes celebrated, exchanging a brisk, triumphant handshake, and the protagonist broke into their signature victory dance. Izuku covered his face with an embarrassed grin and admitted he thought the protagonist had forgotten the dance, calling it weird. The protagonist teased him to join, but Izuku refused with a laugh. The moment underscored why Izuku remained the protagonist's best friend. Behind his smile, however, Izuku felt a quiet sting. He had promised to protect those he cared about and wanted the protagonist to see him as more than who he had been before gaining a quirk. Yet he had been unable to land a meaningful hit on Katsuki or capture him. The protagonist had carried the trial alone. The sense of failure nagged at Izuku as he questioned how he could grow closer to the protagonist if he was always the one being saved. If he did not learn to control his quirk, he would fall behind you forever. Or worse, lose you to someone else. Ida frantically asked Bakugo if he was awake and what had happened. Katsuki remained silent. Ida felt a drop of sweat slide from his brow as he pressed him again and tried to escape his restraints, demanding an answer. Katsuki snapped that they had lost, hurling a harsh insult as his glare turned vicious. Ida's eyes widened briefly before they dropped to the floor. All Might entered the room unexpectedly and released both Katsuki and Ida, offering calm words about learning from the experience. Ida accepted the criticism, but Katsuki was trapped in his own thoughts. He stared at his trembling hand in horror as he replayed the day's events. Izuku had predicted his attacks and made him look foolish, and you had knocked him and Ida out while finding the weapon with unnerving ease. Katsuki's breathing grew uneven and shallow. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes as his mind focused entirely on you. His internal voice raged that he hated you, that he wanted you to leave him alone, that he could not stand being overshadowed. Despite the fury, he knew deep down he would never truly mean it. The thought of you disappearing from his life felt unbearable. No matter how often you challenged his pride or humiliated him, he remained consumed by you. He told himself he would become stronger. He would train harder and be better. He would impress you and make you look at him. All Might recognized the onset of a panic attack and intervened, calming Katsuki before it escalated. The moment settled into an awkward stillness, the aftermath of a heated collision between pride and talent. A few minutes earlier, all the students had watched the proceedings on the huge screen with wide eyes. They were impressed and startled at how quickly the trial had ended, and many of them stared at you. Kaminari noted that the losers had been captured in the blink of an eye and pointed out that one of the winners had not even used his quirk. Siro added that you had practically done most of the work without much effort, and he could not imagine what you would do if you were serious. Ashido said that your speed was intimidating. Todoroki watched you perform your trademark victory gesture with a stoic expression. He acknowledged that you did not act haughtily toward others, but he also saw you as a challenge to his goal of proving himself without using his full power. He worried he might have to break his promise in order to match you someday. One thing was clear to him: you were a worthy rival. Back in the monitoring room, 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝖡𝑍𝑢 finished explaining why she considered 𝖎𝖏𝖏 the MVP of the exercise. She argued that 𝖎𝖏 had embraced the role of antagonist with precision and control, making him an effective opponent. 𝖎𝖏 had indeed behaved in a way that made him a formidable foe if he had chosen that path. You reflected on 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢's analysis and the match as a whole. You privately recognized that you had been holding back during the trial. Before you could dwell further, you noticed 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢's costume choice and felt uneasy about its practicality. You decided, in a quiet way, to think of a more practical approach to her outfit. You activated Quicksilver and quickly sketched a modest, more functional redesign from memory. All Might announced the next round. Team B would act as heroes and Team I as villains. As the teams prepared to move, 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 turned to you with a confused look, waiting for your response. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 asked if there was something you needed. You smiled politely and told her you wanted to talk for a moment, promising it would be brief. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 blinked and reminded you that the trial had just begun and they should be focusing, but you insisted, offering a pinky promise that it would only take a minute. You held out your hand. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 hesitated, studied your palm, then sighed and accepted it reluctantly. Katsuki noticed the two of you with intertwined fingers. He felt too stunned and exhausted to confront you after his recent humiliation, so he turned away with a sour expression and refocused on the challenge. Once you and 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 were out of hearing range, you thanked her for coming and began to rub small, nervous circles on her knuckles. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 flushed and pulled her hand back, clearing her throat as she tried to ignore the gesture. She asked what was so important and crossed her arms. You covered your face in embarrassment for a moment, then pointed at 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢's costume and said you wanted to talk about it. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢's eyes widened and she asked what was wrong. You took a steadying breath and explained, as gently as you could, that her hero costume did not seem appropriate for someone her age and might draw the wrong kind of attention. You emphasized that you cared about her safety and that you did not want her to feel uncomfortable or watched. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 let out an offended sound at first and suggested you might be criticizing her because of your earlier trial performance, but you quickly apologized and clarified that you appreciated her earlier comments and had only meant to help. You removed your mask to show you were sincere and asked her to stay and hear you out. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 softened at your persistence and agreed to listen. You let go of her hand and she lingered for a moment, still holding on to the memory of the brief comfort. You explained that you understood she needed to show some skin to use her ability, but you had designed an alternative costume that would be less revealing while still being functional. You showed her the sketch you had prepared and invited her to take it if she wanted. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 studied the sketch in silence. When she finished, her eyebrows rose. The design was practical, stylish, and definitely less revealing than her current outfit. She thought of the times people had commented on her mature appearance and how her background made her an easy target for unwanted attention. The fact that you had taken the time to design something for her struck her, and guilt at snapping earlier softened into gratitude. She clutched the sketch and thanked you, apologizing for her earlier reaction. You waved her apology away and admitted you were bad at explaining things. As you apologized again, you noticed a stray strand of hair out of place and asked if you could fix it. 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 nodded, and you stepped close to tuck the hair back. Both of you were a little flustered by the quiet moment. You stepped back afterward and offered a string of apologies, which 𝖎𝖆𝖌𝖎𝑍𝑢 accepted with an amused expression. They paused briefly before returning to the trial. Later, in a separate tense scene, �㾽𝖆𝖌𝖎 chuckled cruelly and then fixed his gaze on you. The glowing water you had used to heal a wounded man still hovered in the charged air. Recognition crossed �㾽𝖼's face and his grin widened as he told you that he had finally found you. The news landed like a cold weight. You felt helpless and frustrated that, despite your power, you could not help �㽽𝖼 without risking your past life and the safety of the world. �㽽𝖼 haunted your consciousness with guilt. It felt as if he was searching for you with an underlying, curious purpose. You could not stop the shudder that escaped your throat when you saw the malicious intent in his expression. His turquoise pupils stayed fixed on your trembling form while his grin stayed crazed. You wondered why he was actively searching for you. Did you really make that much of an impact on his life? Your eyes darted between your watch and 𝖭𝖆𝖆, terrified that looking away for even a second would give him an opening. Minato wanted you back. Home in 3 minutes. You had activated Quicksilver the moment you set a 10-minute timer on your watch, which meant you had only 3 minutes left to use it and get yourself, the gravely injured man behind you, and your snacks to safety. If you had been alone in the alley, you might have made small talk with 𝖭𝖆𝖆. But you were not alone. A man lay nearby barely breathing. As much as you would have liked to stay and catch up with the notorious arsonist, you could not. A life was at stake. You remembered the advice Minato and Yaoyorozu had given about your behavior. They had said that you were strong and had incredible potential, but you should not treat heroing like a joke. Your teammates had complained that while you often carried the team, you had not taken challenges seriously, joking and ignoring stealth, and you could have finished the trial sooner if you had treated Bakugo and Ida as real threats. You had been treating heroing like a game because your quirk was overwhelmingly powerful. Now you reminded yourself it was not the time to screw around. 𝖭𝖆𝖆 told you that you probably would not remember him. He admitted he was almost unrecognizable, but he insisted he remembered you clearly. He recalled that you had healed his burns on the Ferris wheel and had asked him if he liked jazz. At first his teasing criticism sparked irritation in you and replaced much of your fear. Then he added in a quieter, gruffer tone that you were the only person who had known something was wrong and had tried to fix it. He said you had something in common: shitty parents. Your eyes widened and you rose to your feet. The water still suspended in the air moved in front of you like a shield in case 𝖭𝖆𝖆 tried anything. You feigned shock and called him 𝖭𝖆𝖆. 𝖭𝖆𝖆's brows tightened in vexation at the mention of his dead name, then shifted to an almost proud look. He said he preferred to go by 𝖭𝖆𝖆 now and acknowledged the recognition. The memory of 𝖭𝖆𝖆's small smile and his childish boast about being stronger than all might tightened your chest. 𝖭𝖆𝖆 reminded you of Katsuki, stubborn and determined to be the strongest. You felt a sting of guilt, then clamped your jaw shut. You asked, voice shaking, why he had a problem with the man behind you and why he wanted to kill him. 𝖭𝖆𝖆 shrugged and said the man had angered him by talking trash in a bar. When 𝖭𝖆𝖆 had shown what he was made of, the man had run without apologizing. He spoke of killing casually, as if it were an ordinary task, and the chill that produced on your skin reminded you of how urgent your escape had to be. 2 minutes and 20 seconds remained on your watch. 𝖭𝖆𝖆 seemed to sense your eagerness to escape and chuckled low in an unsettling way. Your stomach fluttered with adrenaline. Before you could act, he said he had a question for you. He admitted the real reason he had wanted to find you was not for a reunion but to understand what you had said that day. It had stuck with him. He said that now that you were here, you could help him, and if you answered honestly, he would let you live. He reminded you that before he had run to join his mother, you had stopped him and warned him not to go to Sekoto Peak. A cold sweat washed over you. How had you forgotten that while he had not? 𝖭𝖆𝖆's grin deepened when he saw the realization in your eyes. He said he could not understand how a kid younger than him could have known about Sekoto Peak, a place used only by his father's family to train quirks. He presented 2 possibilities: either you had a quirk that could tell the future, or you were not from this world. He finished by saying they had all the time in the world. The fact that he framed those options as hypothetical kept full panic at bay, but he still demanded answers. You felt exposed and vulnerable, like an actor under a spotlight. Your eyes glanced at your watch. 1 minute left. You decided you did not care about the consequences anymore. You would not let him expose you to the criminal world. You would get everyone out of there. 𝖭𝖆𝖆 waited impatiently for your answer, his eyes rigid on you. You took a deep breath, abruptly dropped the water shield, raised a shivering hand in a peace sign, and vanished into thin air with the unconscious man and your snacks. 𝖭𝖆𝖆's grin fell in an instant as his gaze snapped from the empty space where you had been to the man who had been on his target list. His bewildered scowl shifted into an exhilarated, dangerous smile. 𝖭𝖆𝖆 let out a low, unsettling laugh and watched the faintly glowing water vanish from the dirty pavement. He promised himself that he would find you again soon and that he always would. After leaving the man at the nearest hospital and making sure the staff took him in, you ran faster than you ever had back to the house. Minato was waiting with a timer in hand. Minato congratulated you with a proud smirk and noted that the time was up and you had done well. You masked your apprehension with a cool smile and told Minato thank you, adding that you needed to get some sleep because it was getting late. You faked a yawn, said goodnight, and closed your bedroom door. Minato blinked, sighed, and wondered when you would ever open up. She decided not to dwell on it and went to her own room to sleep. Inside your room, you could not even rest before the memory of Dabi's almost glowing turquoise eyes jolted you awake. Sweat soaked your skin as if you were bracing for something inevitable. You knew the day would come when you would have to face the future villains, but of all of them, why did it have to be Dabi? Worse, he now knew you possessed more than one quirk. You pressed a pillow to your face and groaned in frustration. This was only the beginning. Things would get harder from here. If Dabi found out, it would be only a matter of time before the heroes, villains, your baby girls, your friends, Minato, and even Katsuki and Izuku learned the truth. They would feel betrayed. You had been foolish to believe you could hide your full power forever, though a part of you had wanted to be discovered. You were tired of holding back. It had hurt to be noticed while pretending. When the truth came out, you told yourself they would understand. They wouldn't hate you forever. It felt like a miracle that you had slept at all, but you still felt restless because today was the day Shigaraki would try to infiltrate UA to obtain Class 1's schedule. You had not answered Izuku, Shoji, or Katsuki's messages. You knew you should have at least let Shoji and Izuku know you were okay, but stress made reaching out the last thing on your mind. You had even blocked Katsuki's number and were surprised by how many texts and calls he had sent. When you opened the front door with your backpack, preparing for the day's inevitable chaos, you were surprised to find Izuku already there. Izuku startled and stepped back, explaining that he had been about to knock and asking if you were all right, worried that you had not answered his messages. He looked worried when he noticed the bags under your eyes. You masked your nerves with a strained smile and told Izuku you were doing better, admitting that cutting ties with Katsuki had been harder than you expected. Your voice quavered as you said that he had said cruel things that hurt, especially coming from him, and that what he had done over the years had been terrible. Despite that, you confessed that you had kept seeing him as a best friend except for Izuku, whom you immediately insisted was still your best friend. Izuku watched you with a quiet expression and encouraged you to continue. You admitted while fidgeting with your backpack keychain that you had tried to believe Katsuki could change. You had hoped the three of you could move on and be friends again, but you realized you could not help someone who did not want help. You hoped that time apart would make Katsuki mature, and until then you intended to stay away from him. Izuku's face brightened when he heard that, while your gaze dropped to the ground. Then, without warning, Izuku wrapped his arms around your shoulders. You enjoyed giving physical affection, but when someone initiated it, you grew tense. You did not pull away, but you did not relax immediately. Izuku spoke gently as he embraced you, comforting you for the pain you had suffered. He touched your cheek briefly as he finished, assuring you that he would never hurt or abandon you and that you would always be his best friend. Izuku genuinely meant his comfort, though a quiet, selfish part of him felt relieved that the rift with Katsuki made things simpler for his plans to be closer to you. He also welcomed the attention. It had been a long time since you had been this close, and he looked forward to the sleepover you had scheduled for tomorrow. Those words loosened something inside you, and tears began to fall. You returned Izuku's hug and cried against his shoulder while he patted your back to soothe you. You stayed by the doorway for a few minutes until your sobs quieted into occasional sniffles. As you calmed, a small unease crept up. Something about Izuku's words had felt off, and the longer you thought about them, the more you wished he would release you. It didn't make any sense. Izuku was your best friend. He was your rock. He would never do anything to hurt you like Katsuki had, he had said so himself. So why did his hug feel suffocating? Why did your instincts tell you to pull away? You told yourself you were probably overthinking it, like always. Izuku's emerald eyes widened when you unexpectedly stepped back and lightly removed his hands from your shoulders. You rubbed your eyes dry and, with an embarrassed grin, said that you should probably get going because you did not want to be late. Izuku fell quiet for a heartbeat, then forced a cheerful expression and told you that of course you should go, calling you by your nickname. He clasped your hand and led you out of your front yard and down the sidewalk toward the route to UA. The hand holding yours was soft and light, but the other hand gripping his backpack strap was clenched so hard that his knuckles went white. Izuku silently wished that school had been cancelled so he and you could spend the whole day together like old times. He wished for many things and you were at the top of that list. For now he was content being your only best friend. He planned to wait until graduation to ask you to be his partner. He would always wait for you. Unbeknownst to both of you, Katsuki had been hiding near your house and had heard the whole conversation, including how Izuku had painted him as the bad guy. With the little self-awareness Katsuki allowed himself, Izuku had been correct. Katsuki knew he had messed up in a big way and would never stop trying to make things right. He would do whatever it took to make sure you kept your promise. Confronting you in person would probably only make things worse, and he considered that you might be blocking him or deliberately ignoring his calls and messages. Both possibilities tightened his chest. What angered him most was the way Izuku had suggested that Katsuki had never cared about you while making himself look like a white knight. Katsuki's jaw clenched as he glared in the direction of Izuku, vowing to himself that he would not lose to him. The morning was hectic as you and Izuku tried to dodge reporters camped outside the UA gates hoping to catch 𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖌𝖎 for an interview. You also knew that somewhere out there, someone dangerous was watching the reporters like a hawk. Part of you wanted to use Quicksilver to slip away from the crowd and meet up with the friend you had lent your console to, but you resisted the urge. You reminded yourself that you would be with someone special soon. As you and Izuku neared the entrance, a male reporter jutted a microphone toward you in a rude manner, which made you bite your lip. The reporter demanded to know if 𝖎𝖌𝖎𝖌𝖎 was your teacher and what you thought of him. You narrowed your eyes at him and taunted him by calling him Weather Boy before turning to go through the entrance. Izuku glared daggers at the reporter, who immediately began rethinking his career choices. The school day began as normal. Aizawa announced that the class needed to pick a class representative. Classmates began volunteering more accurately, pleading for the position. You chuckled at how everyone wanted the role, knowing well that being class representative meant extra stress and work. In the hero course, it also meant a chance to be noticed by agencies and to prove leadership ability. You rested your head on your arms atop your desk and put on your noise-canceling headphones, deciding that leadership was not for you and that you preferred to coast along while someone else took charge. As you had expected, 𝖎𝖏𝖏 stood and suggested that the most logical way to choose was by democratic vote, making it obvious that he wanted the position. You found him endearing and gave him a thumbs up, letting him know he had your vote. 𝖎𝖏𝖏 flushed and bowed in thanks, suddenly buoyed by your support. After everyone voted, you relaxed back into your headphones, assuming Izuku's victory was inevitable. Your peace and quiet was interrupted when Shoji shook you awake and pointed to the board. When you looked, you discovered that you had received 4 votes. You exclaimed in shock, immediately taking off your headphones. Katsuki demanded to know who had voted for you, clearly displeased. 𝖎𝖏𝖏 was downcast at not receiving more votes despite his efforts. You walked over to 𝖎𝖏𝖏's seat and gave him a supportive pat on the shoulder, telling him not to feel bad and hinting that some future event might allow him to show off his leadership. 𝖎𝖏𝖏, still disappointed, was uplifted by your encouragement and thanked you, promising to support whatever decision you made and punctuating it with a comedic hand chop. You laughed and gave him a small head pat, which he gratefully accepted. You stood at the front of the classroom beside Yaoyorozu, who had only 2 votes. Aizawa announced that the class representative would be you and that Yaoyorozu would be the deputy. You murmured that you had not expected or even wanted this outcome, but with Yaoyorozu at your side it would not be so bad. Yaoyorozu blushed and sheepishly thanked you. Ever since you let her borrow your hoodie yesterday, Yaoyorozu had been dreaming of your warmth enveloping her again. Your smile faltered when you heard the praise and support from your classmates. Ashui remarked that this might not be so bad. Kirishima added with a sharp-toothed smile that he could get behind you. You glanced at Izuku, who gave a nod of approval. You felt like a poser. You did not deserve the title they were handing you, but you could not reveal the truth yet. So you continued to mask your anxiety and do what you were always good at, pretending. Lunch was overwhelmingly busy as usual with the support, management, and hero courses all sharing the same cafeteria. After you had acquired your meal, you moved to join Izuku, Uraraka, and 𝖎𝖏𝖏 at a table when you felt a hand lightly rest on your shoulder. You turned and raised an eyebrow when you saw who it was. You greeted Monoma cheerfully. Monoma smiled and said it felt like ages since you two had last spoken, asking if you had abandoned him, and he wrapped an arm around your shoulder. You let out a dramatic gasp and told him how dare he accuse you, then apologized sincerely and explained that you had been busy. Monoma brought his face closer and lowered his voice to suggest that you could make it up to him by sitting with him and his classmates for lunch. Before he could finish, the Deku squad made themselves known, directing scowls at Monoma's arm. Ida cleared his throat loudly and demanded to know how Monoma knew you. You explained that you had saved Monoma during the entrance exam and that he was your friend. Monoma's smile widened at the envy in the trio's faces. He repeated his invitation in a suave tone, getting close enough to speak discreetly that you could join him and his classmates, if that was all right with you. Izuku interjected with a pleading expression, insisting that you had plans to sit with them today. Ida added that you had made commitments to eat with their group and urged Monoma to plan another day. You frowned, taken aback by how persistent Izuku and Ida were. You did not want to disappoint either party and hesitated. Uraraka frowned at Ida and Izuku, reminding them that you could speak for yourself, then softened and asked what you wanted. Uraraka did not want to see you overwhelmed, but she agreed with the boys that it should be your decision. You sighed with silent gratitude toward her. It had been a while since you had hung out with Monoma. Monoma had long seen himself as a side character after being told he could not achieve his dream of being a hero, and you were determined not to let him feel that way now. You told the trio that you were going to eat with Monoma today and waved goodbye with a strained grin before following Monoma to his table. Monoma glanced back at your friends with a smug smirk as his arm tightened around you. The trio's glares hardened at Monoma, but they agreed not to cause a scene and walked off to find another table. Uraraka's tender gaze lingered on you for a moment longer, and she gave a sad smile when she saw you laughing at whatever Monoma said. She thought that as long as you were happy, she would be happy too. She later rejoined Izuku and Ida, who were less accepting of your absence, especially Izuku, whose emotions were visibly tense as he watched Monoma. The food was delicious as usual. Somehow, eating lunch in a fancy high school always felt different, especially when sitting with the underdogs. You were at Monoma's table with Tetsu and Kenko. You imagined Ida probably telling Izuku and Uraraka about his family's tradition of heroism. Your mind wandered to Ida's older brother, Tensei, and you almost lost your appetite at the thought of his future fate. You remembered how Stain had ambushed and seriously injured Tensei, leaving him permanently hurt. The thought twisted your insides. You resolved to prevent Tensei from going into that alleyway by any means necessary. If Tensei had never been harmed, then Izuku, Todoroki, and Ida might not have been able to stop Stain, and Stain could have continued causing harm. There were some canonical events you could not change, but you would not stand by and let your friend's brother be harmed. You planned to use Quicksilver to run from the UA Sports Festival Stadium to where Tensei would be, move him, and the hero Stain was targeting somewhere far enough away that Stain could not reach the alley in time, and then, after the sports festival arc, find another way to help him. It was not the best plan, but it was the only one that both saved Tensei and preserved the larger events. You would do whatever you could to shield your favorite characters from pain. Tetsu noticed you staring at your food and pointed out that you had been lost in thought for several minutes. You admitted sheepishly that you tended to overthink and asked him to remind you what he had been saying. Tetsu grinned widely and asked if you could ask your mother to make more of her macarons because they were delicious and that she should open a bakery. You corrected him with a feigned smile that Minato was not your mother. The nanny explains that although she would like to bake for everyone, she is always busy and apologizes. Tetsu waves a supportive hand and says that it is fine and that he is glad Monoma brought name here.